Welcome back to Cinema Pursuit. This week we are covering Zach's birthday movie. It is one of the greatest movies of all time, one of the greatest movies of the 2015s. People might not talk about this movie enough. It is the Aaron Sorkin written gem that is The Social Network. Zach, say what's up. No,
Social
no, no.
network. What are you
We ain't
talking
doing
about?
The Social Network. I had to say it. We're doing Steve Jobs today. Steve Jobby. What's up? Why are we doing this movie today, man?
Oh man, this is just like a Ashton Kutcher masterclass, right? Oh wait, no. Oh, we're doing the other one.
Bro, if this
Shoot.
was an
Let's pause.
Ashton
I gotta go
Kutcher
watch that.
masterclass, this man would literally just be like, "Oh, we're gonna put this in the AI, and then we'll get a movie from this." Screw him. Ever since he did the oh no, never liked that guy. Screw him.
He's not had a good last few months. Let's say that. He's
Last few
not had a
months,
good
you don't remember him having to make the apology in his yard, in his
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That was a few
backyard?
months ago, right?
Nah, it's like last
Oh,
year. It's been a minute. He's
oh
relevant
Lord.
at this point. We don't need to be talking about that. Okay, Steve
Let's talk about
Jobs.
the movie.
Let's talk about the action. This actually isn't a fantastic movie. So why this for your birthday?
Yeah, so since I got like unilateral decision on what I wanted to pick for my birthday, I wasn't sure if we would ever get to this movie because it's not something that stayed relevant in like the pop culture discourse, and I understand why in some ways because it was a $30 million budget and it made like 34 million, so clearly a lot of people didn't see this when it came out. For me, it's one of my favorite like biopics of all time. I've seen this probably close to a dozen times now. It's almost like a comfort food movie. It's a movie I watch usually once or twice a year. And let me just first off by saying I'm not an Apple fanboy. The last Apple product I owned was an iPod Touch. I've been an Android guy. So the reason
And
I say that,
and your
yeah,
computer. You don't like you literally sitting in a room with two computers. I've never owned a Mac. My brother owns a Mac. We used Macs in high school. I don't really per se like using them. I've got an iPhone. I've got an iPad, but that's about it. And
yeah.
oh,
So
I
I just
actually do
want
have an Apple Watch. Okay, I
Well,
do
I
have that.
I I well, I wanna make that point because what's interesting about this is one of my favorite biopics of all time, but I actually care very little about the actual subject of the movie. Like, I have some interest in Steve Jobs' life because just his importance to modern computing or, his company's
Just
importance.
his importance to just everybody on Earth, because
Yeah.
we're all touched by his effect one way or another. The what he talks about even within the movie is like trying to essentially take the computers and put them in everybody's hands, and he successfully did it. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, they're the biggest company on Earth right now with the most liquid cash, right? Like that's them. Like Apple is that company, and they weren't
Yeah,
always that.
yeah, they have one of the biggest market caps, not to get into stock stuff too much, but they have one of the biggest market caps, and they have their ability to they could literally just go buy, you think of a company like Disney, which is huge. If Apple wanted to, they could go buy a company like Disney and not be in, significant
It is
financial
light
distress.
work for them. And like you said, we're not really too worried about that. And I think this is not, it's a biopic, but it's not a biopic in the sense that it is like what happened with The Social Network. Sorkin never wants to tell stories, real stories of real people, and have it be, oh, they started in the garage and then they got this and then he died at this point. Like there's no A to B to Z with that, and he just wanted to get the essence of all these characters and then put it into a format. And that's the
Exactly
difference
what
here.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The reason that I keep coming back to this movie and what makes it memorable to me is its dedication to mythos over realism. Sorkin and Boyle both clearly valued exploring the mythos and the essence of Steve Jobs versus just trying to tell a cradle to grave Wikipedia article of a movie. And because of that, it's rewatchable, it's engaging. There's a lot of character work because you're not trying to just fit a bunch of information into a movie. You're trying to say, this is what Steve Jobs was as a person, but also as an American, you know, methodic, figure.
No, he is one of the mythological, like inspirational characters of the 21st century for Americans, maybe across the world. Because when this man died, Sorkin talks about it. He's like, I didn't realize the effect that people like really felt about this man. And I'm gonna go straight to his words. about, making the movie itself. He said this is not a dramatized Wikipedia page. There isn't a single fact about Steve Jobs that has been distorted, perverted, nor invented. He couldn't, wouldn't, and legally could not do that. And the only conceit that he created for the movie was that every 40 minutes before every one of these events that happens in the movie, he has a conversation of some sort with the same five people.
Yeah.
And in real life, he said that Scully, they didn't speak after the firing. Like that whole situation, they never spoke after that. But in this, he comes back almost as a boogeyman in a sense, and it's about that one situation, but it's just he keeps harping on it, and it's like emotionally, the story is there for Scully to be in the story or to be in the movie. And fun fact, Walter Isaacson's book, he's not in the book. He wasn't interviewed for the book. He didn't want to be in the book. But when Sorkin went around asking, interviewing people, he actually opened up and told him stuff. And that's the only reason he's in the movie. He's like, I'm going to be making this movie. And he told him this, the stories about Steve. And obviously Sorkin found the juice there, right? He found the drama within the Scully stuff, and obviously Jeff Daniels in this movie, just masterclass work yet again.
Yeah, there's a brilliance to that where if he had the least information on this character, the Scully character, and yet that's to me the most engaging plot line in the whole movie and has the best writing in the whole movie. So him having almost a blank canvas for this Scully character to project this father figure, this, at times ally, but at times main conflict of the movie, to be able to put all these points into this character is significant, and the fact that he didn't have much to go off with, I guess, helped that. And I don't think it takes away from the movie. If anything, it gives Steve Jobs a foil to where he presents Jobs as this very one of one guy, someone who doesn't have that CEO mindset. And then you have this CEO that's trying to work with him, also trying to be a father figure, also trying to run the company. And the two colliding that we see in Act Two is incredible, fireworks of those two ideas, and Sorkin does a really good job of just writing that and creating that conflict.
And what Sorkin writes within this, and I think as much as he makes movies, Sorkin is, you know what degree Sorkin has? I don't know if you know this. He has a degree, a bachelor's degree in musical theater. That's his,
Really?
yeah. And I think it's Bill Goldman, William Goldman, the guy who wrote like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, All the President's Men. That's his mentor. So it's like he was coming from like some real class, and he writes like a playwright. That's what it always feels like every time he has a movie that's good. One that's we're going to talk about in just a second, but it's like this movie feels like a play, but it could not have been a play. This movie, if they really put this on like Broadway or something, I don't think it would be this good. Because what Danny Boyle does is he juices it, but it's like Sorkin, he found the right approach to it. Because like obviously we're talking about him and Scully, but the main like emotional point of the movie is very much Jobs and Lisa, like the story of like father daughter. And Sorkin was like, "Yeah, that's my in. I'm gonna talk about that. I cannot bring any single piece of romanticism to the work, like the products that like Steve Jobs made. Like I use his products, but they're not, I don't feel anything towards them. But I have a daughter. I have that sort of relationship, so that I can really tap into. And obviously, he taps into that. Woz and Jobs, Scully and Jobs. It's a lot of things where it's like he's comparing Jobs to like regular people, right? For me, it feels like he's trying to sober him up. It's like every like 40 minutes before those things, he's like, oh yeah, it's like Christmas Carol with me. It's like, oh yeah, you're gonna meet all these people and they're gonna try
Yeah.
to like sober up. Like you're trying to be this crazy, whatever, inspirational, visionary, that all those sort of terms that he probably would have loved to hear people call him and love to hear him call him, but it's like he was still just a human being. Like the man was not a god, even though people pretty much might think of him as one.
Yeah, well, they definitely are happy to show his failings as a person, and that becomes a major point of the story is Wozniak, tells them near the end there, not that I'm sure this might be in your quotes, but you can be decent and you can be brilliant or whatever exactly he says there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thing of the story is that Steve can't figure out how to do both, and he's fundamentally flawed. I don't even know if you can call him a hero, just a fundamentally flawed protagonist. He's the protagonist of the story, and he's flawed, and all the people around him are expertly written to show those flaws. His relationships with all of them bring out those flaws, and his flaws as a father, his flaws as a friend, his flaws when dealing with other people who want him to succeed but maybe not in the way that he sees it. They all cause this conflict because to Steve there's one way to do it, and I'm the one who can do it, and all these other people disagree with that. Boyle and Sorkin together is really interesting, and we should explore that some, because when we see Sorkin in his last project about a big technology piece, the social network of Fincher, Fincher's style is very more,
Cold.
I don't cold. That's the right word.
Cold. I
And
mean, like
Sorkin's
Fincher is the coldest. Like
yeah,
him and Denny. I think Denny has a little bit more heart than him, but Fincher is one of the coldest directors of all time. He feels almost removed from stories, and he's able to really get into them in his approach. But if so, for anybody who might not know, Fincher was supposed to direct this in the first place. They set it up at
mhm,
Universal. There's all the drama. If you want to make a whole movie about it, they could, because the whatever Gawker and everything, the 2014, the North, the people, the leaks that Sony had, all the emails are there. And
yeah.
you know what it is? Literally, this is literally just Fincher at one point just trolling. He's straight trolling. He's just like,
Yeah.
I'm done with this situation. Like, y'all are
It
really just messing it up.
yeah, so it was originally supposed to be, Fincher and Christian Bale. Christian Bale was gonna play Jobs. I know that Fassbender doesn't look like Jobs totally, but I don't know how they were gonna make Bale
They
work.
didn't want to.
Um
So their whole point was that I think it's Sorkin or Boyle, or they both pretty much agree that this is supposed to be, anytime you make a movie, it should be an impressionist painting. It should not be a photograph. Meaning that
yeah,
if you take a photograph, then it's kind of, set in stone what they are. I think maybe a movie like Elvis, the was that it was called Elvis, the Boz Lerman movie?
I think so.
Yeah,
I don't
that
know.
Elvis movie with Austin Butler is more of a photograph. The movie that Sorkin mentions, right? He's like, "Oh, if you want something closer to a photograph, then it's like All the President's Men, where it's like it's a real story, these real things are happening, and there's a real repercussion to these
Well,
things."
we have a direct other side of this where
Yeah,
the
Social
Jobs
Network.
movie with Ashton
Oh yeah,
Kutcher
true,
was a
true.
photograph. They got Ashton Kutcher because Ashton Kutcher looks like young Steve Jobs. It's uncanny. So that's why they casted him in the role. But guess what? The performance wasn't good and the movie wasn't good. But back to what I was trying to say, the Social Network was interesting because the lively dialogue that Sorkin writes being put in a cold Fincher movie gives an interesting dynamic. But with Boyle, Boyle is what I would call, and I don't mean this as a negative at all, Boyle's an overdramatic filmmaker. He loves to up the drama of what he's doing.
Yeah.
Sunshine, for instance, in there is over dramatized in terms of, but it's a sci-fi setting, but he brings a lot of life
Oh,
to it
till the
with this
third act.
horror and drama.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the in the third
No,
act and all that.
I was gonna throw it
But
right back to Train Spotting.
yeah.
He's been doing it his
Trainspotting,
entire
another good
career
one.
because he's
Yeah,
like the movie is so tense, and it's like the tenseness that he brings. He's got a lot of heart, which I mean,
yeah.
if you watch 127 Hours, Slumdog, he's got heart,
Slumdog's
and
a good example.
so it's like he puts the heart in there, but he also knows how to do all the intense work. And
So,
Fincher couldn't have done this.
no, no, because I think Fincher would have done it with his, he has a cynicism to him when he makes his films, which I like in a lot of his films. But with this film, the to give Steve Jobs to make him be almost an empathetic character, you needed someone who could give it some heart. And Boyle and Sorkin is somewhat one of the most natural pairings I've ever seen of a writer and a director, maybe outside of like Zillion and Spielberg. Like these two guys here have similar ideas to how they write. They want it to be over dramatic, they want it to be showy, and they want it to have heart. And that pairing works so well because I think they both had a similar vision for this movie.
Oh yeah, but that's the thing. We can talk about it now. It's like when it comes to Sorkin, he has directed 3 movies now. He directed Molly's Game, The Trial of Chicago 7, and Being the Ricardos. And one of those is a good movie. I think the other one is solid. One Ricardos I didn't even see, but I don't think
Ricardo's not good.
Sorkin doesn't understand that he has this genius on the page, But for that genius to actually work, he needs someone to like adjudicate his work. So it's like someone has to put it through their lens creatively. And I don't think he's creative as a director, because what Danny Boyle does in Steve Jobs is completely different. He understands that, yeah, we have to have the script, but I'm going to push the visual of this movie so hard that it is lining up with the actual story. And I mean, obviously, Fincher does it. We can say Moneyball does it. Bennett Miller did it. But I think this is the best one where it's like the pairing of Sorkin and the director is perfect. This is the most perfect it's been out of all the movies. And I think that's the hot take here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because he's wrote so many great scripts, but this is probably my favorite. I think the way it's delivered in Moneyball is probably the most interesting, and maybe the delivery itself is what I like the best in that one. But in this one specifically, the script itself is my favorite script of his.
Yeah,
And
I wouldn't. It's like I mentioned Moneyball, but it's not fully his movie because I don't think he came to
yeah,
write it first. Steve Zalian wrote that first, and then like he came in and pretty much punched it up. And you can tell where he punched it
yeah,
up, where it's like he
yeah.
gets on base, right?
And
And it's
well,
like
and it
all that
has
sort
the
of
Bennett
stuff.
Miller influence too,
Yeah,
where, Bennett Miller's only put out so many movies, but one thing in his movies is that he likes to let a lot of room to breathe. He's actually not over talkative in his movies typically. So taking the
true.
Sorkin over talkative dialogue and slowing it down that much was a really interesting effect. And I really enjoy that movie because of that. But this one, it's like those two guys have the same brain. Let's just talk a million miles a second. Let's say everything. Let's make really clever dialogue and just go, go, go. And it makes it so entertaining because of that, because there's so much verbal sparring. In some ways, it's almost like a sports movie where characters are constantly fighting. They're arguing ideals. They're trying to best one another or try to explain why they're right and the other one's not. This is really a movie of arguments. And it's the same arguments with same people just in different times. And that central, all these different conflicts is what drives the movie more than anything else.
And plus, it's the editing, the way he shoots
Yeah.
it, the editing. Because I'll put it this way: it's like I said, Sorkin, he ain't got the sauce, right? It's like if you want like an umami flavor that like where it's like everything is gelling together, there's an actual like sauce there. Sorkin ain't got it, right? He can't use soy sauce. He doesn't seem like a soy sauce type of man. But it's like what Danny Boyle does with this. There's a point where I'm just looking at the shots. I'm like, what are you doing? And I'm like, who has the ideas to do this? And it's Danny Boyle. And Jeff Daniels was talking about, like, yeah, like there's a day, like he's sitting there and he's trying to like put a shot together with like the Margot bottle, the shot of like the two, they're on each side of the Margot bottle. And he's talking
Yeah.
about like how that's an actual shot that they shot with the camera. It's not like, CGI or anything. But he's like, yeah, he's setting that up. He's like, I don't even want to know. Daniel's like, I'll see it in the movie. I don't even want to know. Just do your thing, man. And obviously, Danny Boyle did his thing. And it's like, I want to make the argument of why this is better than The Social Network. For me, at least, is that The Social Network is kind of full of terrible people. I don't want to say that, I'm not. I mean, we're not going to talk off screen how these people are, but it's just like those people are kind of terrible in that movie. And in this one, some of them are terrible, but not all of them. They all have some sort of heart. I mean, Steve has heart towards the end of the movie too. And it's like everyone is trying to do something good in this movie to some extent. And
Yeah.
obviously, like you could go watch The Veep or like Silicon Valley. Like HBO has a real market over on their channel about terrible people being terrible to each other. That's what Succession is, right?
Yeah, and it's a hard, so I don't think either of us put in our soapbox the hot take that Steve Jobs movie is better than The Social Network, and that would be a hot take for most people.
Yeah.
Historically, myself and Vikash have always been a little lower on Social Network than the general film-going public, and we both didn't put it on the hot take because we talked about it, privately so much about how even though the Social Network movie is a there's a lot of good things about it. The production's high quality. The lack of heart in that has always bothered us. And I know part of that's by design, but there's something missing there. And it's hard to define. But I think heart, like you said, is really the right way that I can't ever feel for the Zuckerberg character in that movie. And as Zuckerberg has evolved as a public figure over the last 10 years, maybe that makes more sense and has helped the movie grow in some estimation. But at least at the time, it just felt like it was very heartless portrayal over someone that I felt like was more complex. And again, as we've seen the last 10 years, maybe he's not more complex. But this movie tries to make Jobs a complex character. They really try to put in the effort to give you reasons to like him and a lot of reasons to dislike him. And I like that better. And I like this movie more. I revisit it more. You probably revisit it more as well. And I have no feeling to want to go back and watch The Social Network, especially after we've seen what played out over the last 10 years with Facebook. Like, we
Oh, yeah,
know
and
who he
Zuckerberg
is.
off, like, even
Yeah.
outside the company, like, I don't even wanna get into it because I dislike the guy, and I'd never really say that, but it's like, yeah, there's a reason to. But it's like with this, I mean, they had a specific book as to why they, adapted that one, and this book was actually his biography, and we should talk about it's like, yeah, the approach that Sorkin made was amazing, but it was Walter Isaacson who wrote the biography for Albert Einstein, Ben Franklin. He recently put out one for Elon Musk, and he was the editor of Time. He was the CEO of CNN. He's not just some random guy. And Jobs, before he died, he didn't tell anybody he was dying when he was dying, but whenever that happened, he told Isaacson to come through. I'm going to give you every single bit of piece of information that I have. We're going to be completely open with you. Don't whitewash anything. Say everything as it was, and people need to know my story. And I think if you watch the end of this movie, like the third act, you can tell that I think there's a dramatic difference between what he was the last time we saw him, like in the middle of the movie, and then to the third act. Because you can tell that,
Yeah.
like, oh, this man has learned some lessons. Like, as soon as he's like, on stage, like talking and like everybody's laughing in the room, I'm like, what is this? This is not the same guy. But it's like, oh, yeah, humans can change, humans can adapt, humans can learn. And it's
Yeah.
like,
But
even with his faulty operating system of what he was able to kind of become a better human being for himself to some extent. I mean,
that's what makes the Fassbender performance so engaging. He has to play 3 different versions of Jobs over the course of the movie. The first version is him his most frantic, his most disorganized, his most meanest. When he
yeah.
gets to the second part of the movie, he feels a little bit he's more confident in the middle of the movie, but he still has a lot of those, flaws of being overly controlling and overly, worried about things. And then by the time you get to the third part of the movie, it's a older Jobs, a calmer Jobs, a more understanding Jobs, a job that's reflected on his some of his failings, but not all of them. And having to play all those 3 different versions of them is really tough because I don't think most people would be able to nail one of them.
So, if for anybody who doesn't know, when they shot Steve Jobs, they shot this in a way that's kind of not the norm. They would shoot they would rehearse 2 weeks for the first part of the movie, and then they would shoot 2 weeks, and then they would take a break. They turn off, like, they can't, like, shut down production, and then rehearse for another 2 weeks for the second part. Shut down, then shoot that for 2 weeks. Shut down production again, and then for the third part, obviously, yet again rehearse, and then another 2 weeks for shooting. So they shot 6 weeks, but it took them 12 weeks to do it. And
That makes sense.
that's why it cost $30 million. This is a movie
What
that's done in interiors. And Danny Boyle was like, oh, yeah, we could have shot this movie in Hungary and saved $5 million. And that plus like the way that they shot the movie, I mean, they were actually trying to do something special with this. And they did something special with this.
well
And somehow people just didn't go to see it for some reason. I don't know what that is. I think it's because the Steve Jobs biopic market had gotten too,
Yeah.
a little too
That happens
murky.
where the second movie typically just doesn't get the fanfare even if it was better. But what you said was important, that it was a really smart decision by Boyle to split up the acts like that and film the acts, maybe not sequentially, but we film act 1
Oh,
first, act 2 second, act
they
3.
they, they went
Because what's
sequentially.
important
They went
because
sequentially.
if you well, that's what I'm saying. If you do that, which most movies don't do that and the actors are able to adjust, but for a movie like this where every character is having to play 3 different versions of themselves to keep the performances consistent and in line with what each character is supposed to be at, it makes the job on the actors a lot easier when they only have to think, "This is my act 1 character, and we're doing all the act 1 scenes," and same thing for 2 and 3.
But what ends up happening is it's all on Fassbender. And
Yeah.
Danny talks about they wanted to have something where the actors could actually rehearse and take the time to become their characters rather than we're going to just do it all at one time and then shoot it all at one time and there's no division for it. I think the entire point of when you're actually making a movie is that you're letting you're doing all this stuff and then we're going to make sure that the actors get their 10 minutes or whatever time they use to film, that actual part is copacetic with the entire set. And it's all between, action and cut. And this is the ultimate testament of like, yeah, we're gonna facilitate that the best way possible. Like Sidney Lumet he's known for like taping off, a random warehouse and then getting the actors all there. They might do a table read, but then they'll just rehearse, rehearse, and rehearse. And then you'll have directors who don't like to rehearse. Or you'll have ones like Linklater who's like, yeah, they don't want to rehearse, but I'm gonna make them rehearse because I know it's gonna be better if they actually rehearse. So
Well, yeah,
it's like,
Fincher's famous for having, like, 80 takes just to get a scene right, and then
but
on the other side of the
no,
spectrum,
no.
it's someone like
This man,
Eastwood.
no, he has 80 takes because he has a problem. This man will be like, okay, no, you've seen the thing from Zodiac where he's like, okay, Jake, you have to slide this book onto the side, like onto the passenger side seat, but then you have to do it in this way to where it looks like this. And literally, it's just him sitting there the entire day, just like sliding this piece of paper or like the little book he has onto this his passenger side seat. And it's like, what are you doing? Why are you wasting so much time? But he's like, well, I have all these people here, and if you're making a movie, you have to make it correctly. So I'm going to take the time that I need. I mean, okay,
Hey, give him some
I'm
more respect. Give him some more respect, man.
hey, see,
He
okay,
gets the result.
I've
Yeah.
listened to so many like Fincher dot like whatever his commentaries. I love Fincher. I think he's amazing, but it's just that's what it feels like. Me and him are on a different page. I'm closer to the Danny Boyle page. I've always been closer to the Danny Boyle page because I would make a movie closer to this than the Social Network. Even though Social Network is just technically a fantastic movie, but I mean, if I had to make a movie, I'll just make the ad that Steve Jobs loved from Ridley Scott and this so much. No one's talking about this the Super Bowl. They're gonna talk about this ad. He's so full of himself in the first act for this movie.
What
Like
is it, Scully? He was like, "It has skinheads. It didn't feature the product. It cost
they weren't
$1,000,000."
skinheads.
Yeah.
They were not skinheads.
Those 2 together when they argue in a scene is just magic. Like, I've never seen maybe the only other time I've seen, like, 2 actors have so much chemistry in an
Dumb and Dumber.
antagonistic role. Well, it's like yeah, Dumb and Dumber. Or like The Master, for instance,
Yeah.
it was stuff like that. I mean, those 2, when they're arguing in this movie, they have so much chemistry to know when to cut each other off, when to raise their voice, when to put inflection on certain words, how to even, like, just talk to each other. And all the actors have that sort of chemistry here, but them 2 together, dude, I'll watch those scenes. That second act, I'll watch that scene all the time. And if we wanna get into action is the juice, I can talk more about it.
Nah, I'll drop you right in. Action is the juice. Just like Heat, this is one of the juiciest movies of all time. Zach, what is your action is the juice scene for Steve Jobs?
So the Jobs and Scully argument in Act Two is, in my opinion, the climax of the movie and the most engaging argument that's in the movie. It's a masterclass of editing. It's a masterclass of acting. It's a masterclass of filmmaking. The way it weaves around Jeff Daniels delivering an incredible, like mostly monologue about what happened the night that Steve Jobs got fired from Apple. It cuts between scenes from the past and some of Steve's perspective and some from Scully's perspective. It's cohesive. You can follow it the whole time what each of their arguments were. Plus, it knows when to show the footage from the past and when to just let the argument breathe and take center stage. I give a lot of props to the editor on this one. It's basically taking two things. It's taking these past scenes and the argument. They clearly filmed both. And then later in the editing room, they had to sit down and be like, okay, when do we cut to the past? When do we cut back to them two arguing? And how do we do this in a way that's cohesive? Because the one thing about the movie is a whole thing is in the second act is Jobs got fired. And they do that little in the in between section, they do that little background about, what happened, what's happening with the characters. And you can tell the audience, oh, Steve got fired, and not give a lot of background. But this part does, it gives the emotional reasoning behind the firing. It gives both characters perspectives. It's that reality distortion field that's talked about Jobs in the third act. Jobs saw him getting fired as this sort of like betrayal by Scully, while Scully tells the audience, hey, this isn't the most reliable point of view here that he forced my hand. I showed, like he says, I showed him my cards and you showed me mine,
Nah,
and
this
I'm
man's like,
okay
"The
with
quorum call
losing.
was homicide."
Yeah,
Right there. That's the part.
yeah.
That's the BS. It was suicide. I
eh,
showed you my cards and you still did it.
There you go. See, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is incredible how that's so is cohesive and makes sense with all the editing and the lines and everything. And I just love it. I have that scene on a YouTube playlist. I'll crank it up on YouTube sometimes and just watch it. I will. It is one of my favorite scenes from a movie ever.
Two things about that scene, or actually three things. First thing is the transition to it, because I think he's talking to Andy in I think the green room, and then he's just walking to the stage essentially, and they've got this. I don't know. I love Danny Boyle for doing this. It is literally just some random hallway. It looks like the color correction, the actual colors of the scene where they're talking is very different. It's like you actually have some light in the room, and it's almost like lurid. It feels like like a 70s spy movie to me, and it's just him sitting there in a chair just waiting for jobs to come out of nowhere. And I thought the framing of it was perfect. He's like, oh, and I love the line. He's like, and he says something. He's like, "Oh, don't act stupid. You don't like you're too smart for that." I was like, "Bro, let's go." And
Yeah,
it very much is a fight. It's action. It's literally action without all the the physical fighting. The physical fighting is Danny Boyle cutting together one of the best montages of his career. And that's what a lot of this movie kind of is. And I mean it in a good way, where it's like the cutting and the narrative of the story that he's telling is there. It's like Creed with, the fighting montages. You're telling the
exactly.
story of like they're getting together, they're getting ready for this fight. Except this is a fight that already happened, and they're fighting about a fight that already happened. So it's like a double
Yeah.
fight, and they have to cut back and catch you up in the realest way possible. Of like that's their fight. This is the fight that keeps going on, and we see the side of the vindictive Steve Jobs, which is like, I'm going to tell everybody that you fired me so you can never work again. And I think after this, Scully in real life, he just kind of went to Florida and just didn't do anything else. And he might have done something, but he was in Florida by the time that Sorkin was there, calling him.
Yeah.
And he didn't really have any relationship with Jobs after that. And people just kind of blackballed him because you fired Steve Jobs, and people see that as being stupid.
It's implied that he had success as the CEO of Pepsi beforehand, and even though, but Steve never really respected that because it's just sugar water from what he said. But what's funny is that this is like a verbal sparring. This is a actors sparring. This is a a sparring of ideas. This is so many different elements conflicting against each other that this is Sorkin wrote an action scene in the only way he knows with dialogue, and that's what it is. It's an action scene. It's a fight scene. It's just verbal sparring, not physical sparring. But what's interesting, what you said about Scully, is that he says, "I'm the guy who fired Steve Jobs. That's how people are going to remember me. Why does everybody think I fired you? You're going to destroy me." That plays into Steve's unreliable narrative.
Yeah,
Again, he's unreliable, and the movie will do that where he'll say something, and then a character will be like, "That didn't happen." Lisa Ann does it. Chris Ann, sorry. I'm gonna
it's
let
fine.
you just butt in now.
I think my favorite part of that though is the scene. Obviously it's cutting back and forth, but when it gets to the boardroom, when they actually call the quorum for making the vote, the scene is it feels like a horror movie, and
Yeah,
just the water coming down like in the boardroom, like behind them, and just every single shot that Danny Boyle uses in that scene, and the way that the desk is that the lighting is coming from the desk, and it just feels so dark. Like I told you, it feels like a spy movie to me. And it's
yeah.
just so dark. And it's the darkest scene of the movie. And they
It
really
looks
play it for everything it's got.
It's that over dramaticism that we talked about for that Boyle does. He didn't have to make that scene like that. He didn't have to be pouring rain. It didn't have to be dark. It didn't have to have silhouettes. But really, the silhouette of Jobs, where like he had so many shadows on his face. It didn't have to have these dramatic. Okay, he's out of line. You can either have me or him. Let's call a vote right now. It didn't have to be like that. It could have been procedural. If Fincher would have done it, it probably would have been a lot more cold, kind of like the deposition that happens in Social Network, where it's a lot more cold. but that just lends itself to Boyle's style, and it's what we like so much about the movie.
But I think the main thing is the approach. Right away, the first time we see Scully with him, it's like, oh, like they've called in the Steve Whisperer, right? And like you can feel there's an actual intimacy and there's an actual relationship there where every other person besides Joanna is like he's having a lot of contention with everybody. It's like it needs to say hello. If it doesn't say hello, then you're done. You're done.
Yeah,
And no, it's like he actually has heart within this relationship. And I think whatever Scully said, like in real life to Sorkin, he was like, yeah, there is a tension here. And it's almost a catharsis of like, Steve probably would have liked what he did with the story. I don't know if you know. So Steve Jobs was actually like a fan of The West Wing. That's like Sorkin
hmm,
wrote, and at some point he had called Sorkin up to like write a speech for him, and he just never got back to him in time. So it's like they had real life run-ins with each other, but
that's
it was
crazy.
it was just it just life was like that for him. We don't hear anything about like Pixar or anything like that. It's like Jobs had a lot of stuff left on the table, but it's not relevant to this story. And Sorkin being Sorkin, he wasn't heartless, but it's like he knew like that stuff doesn't matter. This is not a checklist movie in the best way
Yeah,
possible. And this scene
yeah,
right here emotionally tells you exactly what's going on with Jobs. And it also doesn't need to have like he started this company and did this thing and did this. It's like no, he actually has this scene is so compelling that you don't want to watch the 2013 Jobs movie. That's not what
yeah,
this is. Like you would rather watch this. I would rather watch this than most movies.
yeah. What is your accident at the juice scene?
I'm gonna go with the more juicy one. I have two, but the first one
Okay.
has to do. It's the same second act of the movie, and they're in San Francisco. They're doing the whole rollout for Next, the computer, the black cube that he made, and it's the
Hmm.
pit scene with Woz, and it is the juiciest. I mean, yeah. This is a very heavy dialogue based movie. We're gonna get into it, but that scene is one of the best scenes. And I'm gonna this is the first time I'm gonna companion piece the two scenes that I have. The
Hmm.
first one is the walk and talk of Waz and Jobs in the first one, and then this scene right here in the pit with Waz. Where in the first one, it has the whole flashback. They're talking about open system, closed system, and you can see that there's an actual friendship there. And there's a bickering there between the two. He's like, I told you back in the garage, like that's not what I want. Right. And it cuts right back to the garage. And it's almost funny the way that Boyle really makes it out to be. And they're bickering, but they're actually talking about some real heavy stuff where it's like you need to give these people credit. Do you not realize that the Apple II is the only reason that we're making the money? And there's also the bigger part of it where it's like we're trying to have all the details of how these two people were fundamentally different. Waz is like more like us, and then Steve. I mean, I see myself in Steve too, but it's like Steve he was trying to make something for everybody, right? Waz was like, oh, like everyone who can customize this, and obviously nowadays, if you want to customize it, you can go to Linux and Windows, and you can customize your stuff. You cannot do that on Mac. I don't know if I've ever told you this. I have a friend who is, he does computer science. He has a Mac, but he booted Windows onto it because he likes the computer, like the build of it, but he did not want to use Mac. He didn't want to use whatever their OS was. So he put Windows onto the computer, bringing it back to whatever the actual walk and talk. They go through all that there, and it cuts right back into the garage. And he's like, computers aren't paintings. And what does he say? F you.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, computers aren't paintings. And I think that's the thing. It's like, because he says that, I think that's the sort of vibe of what Steve Jobs was. Like computers are paintings to him, and he would have loved this painting of him, which is this movie. But he was like, I want an open system, and he's like, and the
Yeah.
one of the coldest lines of this movie is that like computers aren't supposed to have human flaws. I'm not gonna build this one with yours, right?
Yeah.
And it's like he's probably the only one who's like brutally honest with him till the end of the movie. And obviously, we go right into the opera scene where it's like, obviously, Jobs left the company. He was fired. And Woz was honest. So, like, yeah, it's terrible to work with Jobs. And the best part of that scene in the orchestra is the distance between them. Like he cuts to a wide, and they are literally on the opposite sides of the screen. And it's like, oh, y'all forgot that Danny Boyle is a master at this art. It's like, okay, metronome versus conductor. They talk about how it's like, oh, I play the orchestra, and they're arguing about some real life stuff. It's like, who told you to do this? Did they put this up to you? And it's like, obviously, he's trying to be vindictive, but then he's like, "Oh, I'm not getting anywhere with Waz," and he sees the stupid watch that he has on, like the Nixie
Yeah.
watch, and they just sit there. They're talking about this watch, and it's like, "Oh yeah, they're actually friends," and like they have this relationship that's like
It
actually
it's
quite beautiful.
it's a very particular relationship though, because what's interesting there is that Woz does go public and criticize Steve, calls him like, all these nasty things. And Steve, in his head, even when Woz tells him, no, I did that on my own, he doesn't believe. He believes Scully pushed him. He tells Scully, don't make Rain Man do that. I think it's interesting that he said Rain Man in a way that I think Jobs
Derogatory.
perceive. Well, it is in a way, but also Jobs doesn't perceive Wozniak as having agency in a way. He sees him more as this Rain Man type guy who's very smart and very pure, doesn't have other intentions. And Wozniak rightfully calls him out when Steve's like, "You got to pass, pass for life." And Wozniak is like, "You understand how demeaning that is." Steve doesn't want to give Wozniak the agency to not like him. You know, they're friends and are supposed to be friends, and Steve should just sees it. Okay, well, Wozniak does something that crosses me. He's just screwing up, but we were in it at the beginning, so he gets a pass. And
But
Wozniak's
Waz,
like,
I think
why can't I
he
not
learns from
like you for
Waz
what
by
you're
the end of the
doing?
movie because he
Yeah,
so in this scene he literally when he says like when he says you get a pass for life, he's like, "Do you not know how constant?" Okay, Seth Rogan, one of the best. This might be the best scene he's or this movie is like one of the best things he's ever done. He's a
it
genius
really
for
is.
this movie. He's like, do you know how condescending that was? Why has Lisa not heard of me? You can't write code. You're not an engineer. You're not a designer. It's like the other guy you kicked off Raskin off the Mac project. You didn't do any of this stuff, but it's like, why do I read 10 times a day that you're a genius? And obviously, they talk about all. It's like he comes to the pit with actual concern for jobs. He's like, and he explains the whole thing. Is like, you're trying to sell this thing. It's gonna cost like $12,000. They don't have this money at these schools. You're gonna get killed. I came to stand next to you because that's what men do. And by the end of the movie, in the third act, he reverberates back the same thing to Andy, if I remember correctly. That's like that's what men do. And it's
Yeah,
like these scenes of Jobs' life as a character are some of the most important things that are going on. And it's like he actually learns. And it's rare to say that, characters learn, but it's like it's even the simple thing of like Joanna being like, you have to talk to your daughter about something that actually interests her. And then he's learning about it. He's like, oh, what's that song you're listening to? Right. As the whole scene of that's amazing scene too. Of like them just talking about the song and then the whole thing about regret and all that that's fantastic too.
and it avoids one of the pitfalls of
Biopics.
biographies too.
Yeah.
Yeah, biopics, because oftentimes they will have them learn something by the end, and they become this like very good person a lot of times by the end. And even though Steve does learn throughout these three acts, he still has his flaws. He still has his blind spots. And even though there's some stuff he is trying to get better at, and there's some stuff he never got better at.
Yep.
And I think that's good for a complicated character piece, because if by the third act, Steve is this benevolent like tech hero, it would be a waste. It wouldn't be a good movie. Steve
And
still has lots of flaws. Even when he makes up with his daughter, it's still flawed. It's still him trying to connect with her on his own flawed way. And that's what's really important about these type of scenes.
so when he talks about Jobs this entire movie, he obviously learns and he's improving as the movie goes along, but it's something where even though he's a flawed human character, Sorkin is never quick to judge. He's never vilifying him for like bad behavior. Let's say like a Scorsese wrote this movie, right? Like Scorsese's very much a guy who, if he sees the bad behavior, he's gonna show it to you in like the coolest way possible. But he's gonna be like, "Yeah, this is wrong," and Sorkin, that's not his way. Sorkin says that like I like to ask questions and then not answer them, and That's what this entire movie is. He's asking a lot of questions, but it's like he leaves it up to us to like judge what exactly is going on. And he does it with the Social Network too. And it's like we said, it's like that's a lot colder than this one. And he leaves it to our judgment as to what we think about it. Other people are fine with it. I'm not. We are not.
Yeah, because at the heart of this is more of a character study than a biopic. They invented the Steve Jobs character based on real life stuff, but also his mythos. So as he grows throughout the 3 acts, it's up to you to decide how much has he actually grown. And growth isn't a straight line. In some ways he's grown, but in other ways he still has a lot of failures. So completely get what you're saying there.
Yeah, it's like we can. I mean, they don't talk about Chris Ann too much, like Katherine Waterson's character, like the not the wife, but the baby mama. And there's obviously some real issues that she's dealing with. One of my favorite parts is something that we're going to go into for production value, actually. So I'm gonna drop it right in. Production value. What is your production value for Steve Jobs?
I want to still talk some more about the 3-act structure of the movie that we're focusing on. The biopic formula of cradle to grave is just so overdone and unnecessary in our current age. Like, you can just look up anything on anyone. So when a movie tries to be more of a factual account of someone's life, it's not very interesting. I think a good example, though, of this being not done recently is Oppenheimer, where it plays with the formula by going forwards and backwards in time at points, by hiding certain information from the viewer until it's time to reveal it for dramaticism. But even that movie has some cradle to grave of it. It just starts later in his life, but at least it focuses on the most important part of his life for the public to know about. But in Job, what I really impresses me the most about its structure is that it teaches you its structure. By the second act, you know two things. We're at another important product launch, and all of Steve's friends and foes are there to continue their plot lines one by one. If this was done incorrectly, this would come off as like predictable and lazy. But with this movie, the plots are so compelling and you want to follow them clearly. So by delivering them one by one in the structure serves a story better than any other way would have served the story.
And the production value for the script, which we rarely talk about but with the script itself, is that Sorkin is catching lightning in a bottle. And what the entire intention of Danny Boyle for this movie was that he's like, when I read it, he's English. He's like, when I read it, it's like the book just washed over me, or like the script itself. And he's like, I wanted the movie to feel that way, where it's like it feels like the movie just washes over you. It's really fast, but it's so compelling that you don't really notice it, just the time passing by. And that's what this movie is. Because I was watching it and I was like, wait, there's still 40 minutes left in this movie. I was like, no, there isn't. And then like the 40 minutes go by so fast. And that's the entire point of the movie, is that you're so engaged with this movie. And do you know how long the script is? Like, no, like Sorkin's known for having like a small amount of explanation in his scripts, but they're really long because of the dialogue. This script is 185 pages, when like a regular script is like 125. And I
Yeah.
think Oppenheimer, like you said, is another script that's like 180 pages, except it's not, it's not just, really fast stuff
Well,
on there.
and that's also like a 3-hour movie, so 180
Yeah,
pages, if a
makes
page is
sense.
supposed to equal a minute,
Yeah.
that's the traditional count, right? That
Yep.
makes sense. For this to be 180 pages, but be a 2-hour movie, it just shows you how much pure dialogue Sorkin was writing for this movie, because characters are saying a whole page of dialogue in the span of like 30 seconds when walking from one room to another. There's
And
a lot being said.
it's like that's the thing. My production value for this movie, yeah, there's this fantastic script, but this is the first time in like 19 or whatever, like 21 episodes, that I've talked about actors for production value, because the production value, just as like for actors, is amazing. Like this is something where it's like, oh, if you're in the theater, standing ovation, you're just like, oh my god, like what did y'all do? It's like, and I want to give everybody their flowers. Okay, Kate Winslet, right, as Joanna, she is a chameleon in this movie, and she's amazing.
Mhm.
Waterston as Lisa Ann Brennan, amazing. She has this every woman energy, and I think The first time I saw her was in Inherent Vice, unforgettable after that. And every time she shows up, she's just fantastic. Whether it's Logan Lucky, those Harry Potter movies, she should
Yeah.
be doing better work. But this is one of the best things she's ever done. This is a highlight movie for everybody. All of the actors that play Lisa, obviously Jeff frickin' Daniels, Michael
Oh,
Stuhlbarg as Andy,
oof.
and Stuhlbarg. I think he has this energy to him where it's like people don't necessarily see him as being like a leading man or anything like that. He's very much a great character actor, and he's got this
Yeah.
unassuming thing about him that he always brings to his movies, and they play it well in A Serious Man. But if you're watching something like Call Me by Your Name or something like that, he really plays up the emotions, and he's amazing.
I
Obviously, Waz, like Seth Rogan, this is still the best thing he's acted in. Period. To this day, he did Fablemans. He's the cuck or whatever, but like, still, it's nothing like this. And obviously,
let's
all
talk.
that is to
Yeah.
say that Fassbender he's the one who had to memorize the entire script. Every time they were rehearsing, this man 180-page script. He was off book because he had this entire thing memorized. You haven't seen Hunger from Steve McQueen, but there's a scene in Hunger where he's just like
Yeah.
sitting there, just like just smoking, and he's in jail, and all these things are happening, and it's just Steve McQueen's like, okay, we're just gonna let the camera plural. Okay, we're just gonna act. This is practically theater, but it's actually a movie and it's fantastic. Check out Hunger if y'all haven't. But yeah, Fassbender, amazing in this movie.
I want to do something with some of those characters you mentioned. I'm going to leave out Watterson and I'm going to
Delisas.
leave Lisa's, and I'm even going to leave out Kate Winslet because I don't think you can argue that it's the best movie for any of those characters. But I want to ask you about some of these individually, and I want you to tell me if you think this is the best movie that they or their best performance.
Best performance.
So,
Okay. Because some of them have
so
been in
let's.
great movies. Because if you tell me,
They
oh,
have.
Jeff Daniels, no, like
Well,
Speed, I'm gonna say Speed. That's just
no,
me.
no, but that's what I'm about to argue with you here is I think this is Jeff Daniels' best career performance. I sincerely believe it. I think it's a small role, but his delivery of Sorkin's dialogue, which he's done before in that
The
HBO
newsroom.
show,
Yeah.
so he clearly has a knack for it, and that was almost a preparation for this. But I think this is Jeff Daniels' best performance out of any of his movies, and he's been on a lot.
I think I can agree with that. I think my thing is that I think he has such a like variety. People don't talk about. We talk about like a Robin Williams where like they can really hit the comedy and the drama. I think Jeff Daniels is a low key one where it's like he was
Yeah,
just a character actor his entire career. He shows up in this and Speed and Looper, Dumb and Dumber, among like Godless for Scott Frank. Great villain role there. He plays so many character roles and he really hits them well. But this is the most energy of it, I think. Yeah. No, I can agree that this is his best work. And
so I'm
we'll talk
also
about it in the
wondering if it's
Oscars. He definitely should have had a
yeah.
nom for this. Wait,
Oh
is this
yeah,
the 2015? Oh wait, oh bro.
this is
This
the Mad Max Oscars. Yeah.
no, this is the year where it's Idris Elba, it's Benicio we're gonna get into it. We're
Mhm.
gonna get into
Yeah,
it.
we got a
This is
lot to
the
get into.
craziest year of supporting actors in my opinion.
It is. I wanted to get into Stolberg too, though, which actually, funny enough, he was in the Trials of J. Robert Oppenheimer. That movie. That's
Oh
kind of funny. Since we just talked about Oppenheimer,
yeah.
I actually first saw him in Men in Black 3, and he stuck out because he was
Little
actually really
Bugsy
good in
looking
that
dude.
movie.
Yeah.
But is this? I think I don't know if this is his best role, but I feel like it's in the top 3, right? Because he gives a very
I think
particular
he's
performance that is
no
hard to do as
offense
an actor.
no offense to Jeff Daniels, but I think he's been in better movies and I think he's had better performances in some sense. I think I don't even want to compare them, but I think Stuhlbarg, like
Yeah.
when he shows up in a movie, he really shows up and he's fantastic. Whether it's like a funny little role in like Fargo season 3, or like working with the Coen brothers, or if it's something like this. I think my favorite scene, like I was talking about, Call Me by Your Name. He's got one scene. Anybody can go look it up. He's talking on a couch with Timothy Chalamet, and it's like one of the best scenes of acting I've ever seen. And I think he delivers that in this, but it's like he has less sauce to work with because he's kind of of the 5 people that show up. I think he's the fifth because it's like emotionally that matters. Is like Waz matters more to him, Lisa matters more to him. Everybody kind
Yeah.
of like has a relationship that matters more. It's just Andy kind of fought and became important in the sense of the story of like, I'm here and, I've been here this entire time and you're the one who's terrible. And it's like, he literally tells him, like, I dislike you. I don't like you. But it's like, and then he's the one who gives him like the most emotional terror in this movie by the third act, which is one of my favorite scenes. That's my production value scene, actually.
Oh, really?
The one, no, it's not
Uh,
even the scene. It's the moment of like, just Steve is sitting at the desk trying to like memorize his lines about the Mac, and he is just cutting back and forth to
yeah.
Lisa being younger. Is like, did I really just like miss out on my daughter's entire childhood because I don't know how to be an actual human being? And that's compelling, and it really hits when it happens.
I do want to have. I know this is kind of a legacy discussion, but I still want to go through the other two. For Rogan, this is probably his best role, right?
It is.
Like, I don't think there's an argument there. I think he's been in great comedy movies, but I think in terms of pure acting, I think he was actually pretty good in that American Pickle movie that came out a few years ago. But he hasn't done a ton of serious roles, but by far this is the best utilization of him I've seen in a movie. I don't think that's not an argument, right? We can.
I mean, honestly, I think the best role that he's ever done it was the Green Hornet, and like,
Okay, or you're done. Okay, let's. Okay, Fassbender. This is Fassbender's best role, right?
yeah, this is. I think, but
Okay,
that's the thing. He's like his work with Steve McQueen, 12 Years a Slave, Shame, Hunger. Like that's like a masterclass of work. And then it's this. Like I don't know.
so
I'd have to really figure it out in my head, but I think this is the one where he has to do the most work, and he's
So
really
the
good at
point
it.
I'm making, with your production value there is that we have 3 or 4 actors giving their best performances of their career in this movie. So you're right by saying production value is the acting performances because that is the strength of this movie. There's 2 strengths, the writing and having the actors who can deliver it. And these actors delivered that writing in a way that's worth calling out. So I think that was a good one.
And I think it's worth noting that Jeff Daniels, Michael Stuhlbarg, Michael Fassbender, they all don't have Oscars. I don't think they have Oscars. And I think if they ever get honorary Oscars, they're most definitely going to use scenes from this movie for their little Oscar clip because this is
Yeah.
honestly it's a career highlight for everybody. Because if you look at Elliot Graham, he's the one who edited this movie. He won an Oscar for Milk, which we're not really going to talk about. I mean, I don't see it as being some amazing movie, but he's edited that. He's edited, for Molly's Game, a couple other things. He'd edited Captain Marvel and No Time to Die, maybe as co-editor, but it's nothing too crazy. Like if I'm sure he would probably say like this is a career highlight for him. Alwyn Kuchler, fantastic DP, but like this is one of the for production value I'll talk about it, is like this is one of the coolest things they've ever done for a movie, where it's like the first part of the movie is shot on 16 millimeter film, and then they moved to 35 millimeter, and then by the time the third act of the movie, the third time, 1998, they're shooting digital, and I think it looks perfect. And it feels like every single time they're progressing as the movie progresses, as all these characters progress through time, the actual technology of what they're shooting on actually does too.
I thought that was a really unique idea, and you can almost see this going back to Danny Boyle when he did 28 Days Later, where he used really rough digital cameras to give like an effect. He kind of goes back to that idea here of using different types of cameras to give a feeling to the viewer being in that time period. And it's especially important in a movie like this where it's about technology improving. As the technology improves throughout the acts, so do the cameras. You go from very grainy film all the way to this modern digital looking filmmaking.
But that being said, which one looks the best? No,
Well,
honestly,
the
which one looks
third,
the best?
I think the third act does.
I think they all look just as good. I don't judge cinematography off of the quality of the camera itself, but the quality of like what they're doing with the visual and then what the visual is delivering. And it's like, obviously, if you're shooting 16 and 35, you can see a massive difference in this movie of like when it jumps, but it all feels timely. It just flows perfectly. I don't know. It's hard to put into words because I think what Danny Boyle did is this is literally perfection. And he usually works with Anthony Dodd Mantle. When they shot like Slumdog, they use these small cameras and they're like really running through the slums in India. We're not going to get into that because, I will get on my soapbox about that sort of stuff. But it's like he really pushes his camera work every single time. And with this, it is ruthless camera work where it's like, okay, Steve's going down, we're going down with him. But that's the thing. This is why the production value for this movie really is that this is a movie, this is not a play. And there's no way this as a play could have worked. This is 100% has to be a movie, and this feels like the best thing that Sorkin's done as a movie for me because of Danny Boyle. It's not just him; it is very much Danny Boyle.
I want to get into this later during our legacy discussion, but you can see now as Sorkin's gone on to do projects by himself, you can see where his, I don't know what the right word would
His
be, but his
artistic prowess, his creative vision as a director. I want to say it's tactless. I don't want to like. I would say it to his face. I would say that he has compelling work. I liked Molly's Game. I thought that the Trial of Chicago 7 was actually
Mhm.
really really good, but it's not like there's still something missing there. It doesn't feel
Yeah,
like there's a creative voice there as a
there's a
director.
vision
It
that's
feels like
missing.
there's a director there. It doesn't feel like there's a filmmaker there in a sense where it's
Yeah.
like he should be a filmmaker because he literally wrote the movie. When you look at writer directors, you talk about Nolan, you talk about even Denny, you talk about even Spielberg with like the Fablemans, you talk about Danny Boyle. Danny Boyle writes some of his work, and it's like there's an authority there within that work. It doesn't feel like there's a creative authority behind the directing with those, sadly. But that being said, Sorkin, what is Sorkin good at? It's not, we're not telling him to, shut up and dribble, but the man knows his dialogue. So, dialogues. What piece of dialogue affected you the most in this movie? What do you love about the most packed dialogue per second movie that we've done on this podcast yet? Steve Jobs.
Yeah, so I have two pieces of dialogue I wanted to talk about. I want to talk more about the first one, and the second one I just want to mention. So, as I said before, the Jobs Scully arc is my favorite in this movie. And at the end of the dialogue they have in Act 3, Jobs says to Scully, and this is a great delivery by Fassbender, he says, "The things we could have done together." And he doesn't say it in a way to taunt him, a way to make Scully feel bad. I believe he really says it from a place of like sadness and regret
Sincerity.
that,
It's sincere.
yeah, sincere. So just to for anybody who might not remember, this is the scene where Scully and Jobs they intercut between the past where Scully's offered the CEO role and the present, which is essentially doing a post mortem on their friendship, but also their failed father son relationship. Something throughout the whole movie is that when Jobs talks to Scully, he's willing to be a little bit more vulnerable than when he talks to someone like Andy or even,
Chris Ann.
Chris Ann. Yeah. That line that the things we could have done together is one of the only times that he has a level of admitted retrospection on what's happened. Scully and Jobs together probably would have been even more successful than Jobs on his own. There's a sadness that both of them share there about how the relationship turned out, and he lets his guard down in that moment. In other moments where he's fighting with Waz or Andy or his daughter, a lot of times it's someone else's fault or someone's out to get him, like the Times cover. But in that moment, Jobs acknowledges that he had a role to play in ruining the relationship with his father figure. And it's really powerful, even if it's just that one line.
No, my favorite part of that line is that he leaves the room, and the way that Boyle shoots it is like the door's closing, and then we see Jeff Daniels, we see Scully through the door, and then he says it as soon as the door closes. And literally, it's like the things we could have done together. And, Scully says it himself. And I feel the emotion of what he says more than what Jobs says because it's like he agrees with him. And it's like, oh, we really could have been amazing together. And I probably reading into this too much, and I really do believe that whatever conversations he had with the real Scully, that's the emotional message that he wanted to send between
Mhm.
those two individuals was that these two could have been even more powerful together, but it just didn't happen, and that's life.
There,
And he
yeah,
explored that to the fullest extent.
yeah. The level of regret there is definitely shown on the screen, and it definitely puts an ending to that arc of Steve really being abandoned again by his father figure. He talks with Scully about how much it hurt him that he was given away for adoption a month into being born, and or the family didn't want him, and then he was like stuck in the courts trying to figure out, and that his mother didn't love him for a year because they were afraid of losing him. And it happens here too, where he has this father figure with Scully who also abandons him or betrays him in the second act. And he regrets so much not having relationships with either his chosen family or his real family throughout the film. He's worried about having a relationship with his real father because he's afraid he might find a way to sue him. It's sad. It shows that Jobs' refusal to be vulnerable and having his guard up with everybody is part of this feeling that everybody really is out to get him, and not in like a I'm better than everybody else way, but in a sad way that he doesn't trust anybody to ever care about him in the way that he deserves to be cared about. It conveys a lot in that scene.
So you told me this is all about toxic masculinity, isn't it? No, 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 but it really is. I think the problem is that I think one of the greatest things about this century is that men, not that men weren't vulnerable before, but it's like men are being able to be more vulnerable on screen. Where it's like I talked about it before, but it's almost like your action hero. You don't want a Stallone. You don't need like this butched out, big huge guy. You just a real, a SEAL team member. It's just gonna look like a. He's gonna look like Barth. He's gonna look like a lanky dude, a little small dude, and he's really good at his job. And that's just what a real human is. But I mean, the dialogue on this is it's amazing. What's your second line? You have a different line too, right?
I'm gonna read the second line, and this is one of the just most brutal takedowns I've seen put to film. And it's not because anything that's said is particularly brutal, but the way Fassbender delivers it is like just threatening. So this is in the first act of the movie when the computer won't say hello. That's the main conflict of that first act, right? So he's looking at Andy and he says, "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to announce the names of everyone who designed the launch demo. I'm going to introduce everyone and ask them to stand up. The bag was designed by Susan Kerr. The Macintosh font that's scrolling across the screen was designed by Steve Capps. The Starry Night and skywriting was Bruce Horn. Mac Paint, Mac Wright, Alice, down to the calculator. And then I'm going to say the voice demo that didn't work was designed by Andy Hertzfeld." One, this is a clever way of showing that he does in fact know everything about his product and who designed it. He's not just a con man. And two, it's just an absolutely brutal threat to the point that it actually comes back up as a point in Act 3 about their relationship. So I just love the writing and delivery of that line.
My favorite part is that when he's at the elevator and he does the whole thing with the gun to the head, because I still do
Yeah.
it to this day. It's unforgettable when he does that. Because it's not like he like takes off the gun. It's like he's like, I've got a gun to your head. He literally like Boyle, like you said, this is Bollywood level, like over dramaticism in the best way
Yeah.
possible. Where it's like, I've literally got a gun to your head. He doesn't have to pull out a a 9 mil. He just has to do this, and it's like you get his intention. Is like that's how you sell
It,
movies.
it plays with that visual, like evocative thing he says before, where he's like, Russian roulette is 1 in 6 bullets, and you reverse
Oh,
those odds.
hold
Go
on.
get some bullets out of that gun.
And the best part of what you're talking about is when he starts talking about everybody, like all the people that are actually in the process of like actually like doing something for the company. This camera starts to revolve around him, so there's this the camera moves a lot in this movie, but like that's one camera movement where he starts to show you everybody else around them that's actually within this. And there's also a thing where it's like he's saying all this stuff, but then all the other people are standing there listening to this too, and they're probably the people that he's talking about, and they're all under the same terror of Steve Jobs at that point. And they're kind of being complacent in that, like, yeah, we kind of have to deal with this dude to do our work. And there's a whole thing about that too, of like, it shows exactly what Steve is, and it also shows the environment that he's kind of cultivated at Apple at that point. And if you juxtapose that with the opening of the third act with 1998, where he's on stage and everyone's just kind of chilling there, and it's kind of a low key vibe, it's vastly different. He has grown. Like the culture at
Yeah.
Apple is different.
What was your dialogue?
Don't play stupid. You can't pull it off. No, but no, see, but that's the thing. Is like there's a lot of movie dialogue where it's like you want movie dialogue. That's one of those lines. The other one is
That's a good point.
artists lead and hacks ask for show of hands. And that's one of the best lines of the movie. I think what happens with Sorkin is that he takes so much time to write his movies where it's like I'm trying to distill every single character down to at least one line so someone can remember this line and that's the character. Jobs believes that he's an artist even though he does not have a craft per se where it's like he's not a designer, he's not an engineer. You know what he is, right? A director.
Okay.
He's the one manipulating people and trying to get a performance out of them, or he's kind of getting all these people, these talented people, whether it's like a cinematographer, a production designer, costume
Yeah.
design, and he's trying to tell them, convey to them, okay, this is what I need. I need a cube. It needs to look like this. It needs to do this. And that's his job. And he's the one who
Rem-
gets all the credit.
remember that point for later. I
Okay.
have something on
No,
that.
no, but
Remember
you
that.
get what I mean, like, where it's like
I
that
do.
one
He
line,
is.
that dialogue, that's where it's an extremely compelling and relative thing, at least for me and a lot of other, like, creative adjacent people that's like, yeah, we might not
Th-
necessarily have the talent per se, but it's like we are confident within the visions that we have. That being said, one of the best lines really is like you can be talented, but you don't have to be like a terrible person at doing it. And that reminds me of people where it's like there used to be directors who are like extremely terrible people, and I don't even want to say their names, but then you'll have someone like a Denis Villeneuve. People are like, yeah, that's just a kind dude right there. And that matters to me more than, whatever art you can pull off, because your art is never going to be an excuse for being a terrible human being. And that being said, one of my favorite lines of the movie is 3 words: I'm poorly made. And that's what Steve is. It tells his whole story that he really is a flawed human being, as we all are. No matter how much money, no matter how much power, no matter how much fame, no matter how much influence, no matter how much people respect and value you, you're a human being. We're all going to go through good times. We're all going to go through bad times. And even if you're building walls and hiding behind them and creating a mythos about yourself, when it comes to you being alone with yourself, you're still a human being. And I think that's Sorkin's entire point, is that these people are just people. And they're the ones who are going around and changing the way that we live, right? He made the social network. He made this. And I think it's his fascination is just that these people are shaking our world. And why are they shaking our world? How are they shaking it? And who are these people exactly? And why are we giving them, or not giving them, but have they been given the power or the ability to change what we need? I mean, it's not necessarily something where it's like they are, they're creating, something that's like we're forced upon us, but they're creating something that we wanted, right? And Steve talks about
Yeah.
this movie, right? It's like people don't know what they want. They just like, I'm gonna give them something that they need.
It's always been the famous, thing about Steve Jobs. He says the person who said that customer is always right must have been a customer,
Great
because
line, great line.
it is. But what you were saying before about him admitting he's poorly made, as far as I'm aware, that's the first time in the movie that when he's confronted by someone about something bad that he did, he actually admits that it's his fault. Usually he blames someone. Someone's out to get him. Every time in this movie that someone brings up something that's his fault, either he brings up that it's wrong because he sees things in his reality distortion field about how someone else did something wrong. But this is the first time with his daughter where he says, yeah, I'm poorly made. I don't have an excuse for you this time. I am poorly made. And that's not an excuse. That is an admittance of his fault, even if it's his odd way of saying it, that is him admitting fault. And that's an important character growth moment that happens at the end of this movie.
I think Sorkin puts it together with the dialogue. And it's a movie where there's other ways to show the story, but it's very much, I mean, it sounds basic to say that like a writer is the one dictating your movie or whatever, but it's like he very much plays this dialogue to work within all of that. But it's like, okay, it's like you have all the character moments, but he also juxtaposes them with all the technical things. Where it's like we have all the product launches, but literally at the end of the movie with his daughter, he's like, I'm gonna put music in your pocket, which is the corniest line of this movie. Which I
Yeah, to
I
be
love it.
honest,
I love it.
I don't
Honestly,
I
I'm
don't
just gonna go with the vibe of it.
I mean, I don't love it in some ways, but in other ways, I get what they're going for there. Like this this is his way of connecting with his daughter because he can't. So he's like, I'm gonna make you this because I don't know any other way to connect with you. It's probably I never loved that part, but
I
I
think it's a
understand what
dad
they were
thing.
doing.
I think it's a dad thing where it's
Yeah,
like I was listening to Don Burgess of all people. He's the guy who shot Forrest Gump and like Aquaman, like a really good cinematographer on the Deacons podcast. He's talking about how his dad was a carpenter and had a construction thing or something, and his sister wanted to do photography. So he's like, yeah, like my dad could build anything, and my dad built my sister a dark room in the house. Or it's like Asian parents, like they'll cut you fruit. Not my parents, but like other Asian parents is like it's like almost a trope where it's like they won't say sorry, but they'll like cut you fruit to like try to be nice to you with like actions rather than the words. And that's what Steve's trying to do. He's trying to
yeah.
take that regret and trying to put it into action where it's like I'm gonna use what I know what to do and trying to dig myself out of this massive regret I've had for the last like 18 years of your life.
It's not binary. You can be decent and gifted at the same time.
Bars.
Just a good line, man.
I like Waz for the sense of like I know who he is as a human being, and I like I kind of align with the with certain. But that's the thing is like you kind of align with a lot of the things with a lot of characters, but especially Waz for us, where it's like the whole thing about open system and closed system that really hit me. Where it's like I don't think about it one bit, but I'm very much an open system guy. Where it's like the pieces of this world need to fit together so everybody can be in like everything's copacetic. But Jobs he wanted it to be like, okay, I'm gonna have my own little world, and he crafted his little world, and dang, do people love it? People are like, oh yeah, it's like, and it
Mhm.
literally, if you want to use something that's not Mac or like Mac related, even apps in a Mac, it sucks, and it's like, come on, whatever. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna complain. The man's
It
dead, but like, still,
But I know, but I will say with the Wozniak character, I work with a number of engineers and, computer engineers, computer admins, architects in a Linux space. And with Linux, you have a lot of hobbyists. And there's a lot of people who I work with who are very similar to the Wozniak character in this movie. People who really do care about trying to find ways to manipulate a computer system to give people more options to make things better, more functionality, and they don't care about the politics, about the power, the leadership part that Jobs is worried about. They're like Wozniak. They're like him with the watch. They want to make a cool thing. They want to have it be as available and open to everybody. They don't care about how it'll sell or how it can be monetized. They just want to make something really cool. Wozniak is an important person in Jobs' story, but there's a lot of people who also represent that type of person, that type of computer enthusiast.
I won't harp on it. The last thing before we get off of dialogue is a dialogue that I hear all the time where it's the C minus student is the one who's employing the B plus student, and the B plus student is the one who's managing the A plus student. And that's kind of what that is in like put into a movie where it's like it's not the smartest guy. It'll never be the smartest guy that's running things, but it's almost a thing where it's like if you're stupid, not stupid, but like I see it in myself where it's like if you're not the brightest bulb in the room, you have an ability to be almost delusional, to be like a Steve Jobs and try to get stuff done. And that's the only way, you're able to take risks, maybe calculated risks at that, and be able to move things forward. And obviously, Sorkin brings it all back into character and delivers it with his dialogues. But there's dialogue, but there's also music in this movie, isn't there? So,
Is there?
no, no, no. Why would there be music? Daniel Pemberton, who is that? But seriously, the Layla, Daniel Pemberton. Actually, I mean, there are some needle drops in this movie. Zach, what's up for you for music for this first Steve Jobs?
I'm gonna be honest, there's not really a lot. There's 2 songs, and I'm forgetting the name of the first one, but the second one is "Shelter from the Storm" by Bob Dylan, which is mentioned in the first act of the movie and then is played at the end credits. So, there's not a lot of choices for the Layla on this one, but if I was gonna pick a Layla, it would be that because it sums up somebody who's going through a loss, and Dylan wrote this after he or was going through or right after he divorced his wife, and it's a song about someone who used to give him shelter from all the hard things he dealt with in life, and by the end he doesn't have that shelter from the storm, and it feels a bit like Jobs kind of isolating all the people who are meaningful from him in his life. Because at the end of the movie, it doesn't seem like he's on good terms with Wozniak anymore. It doesn't seem like he really has anybody except the people who work for him that are actually close to him. So he is like the Bob Dylan character in this, where he's going through so much and he doesn't have anybody to give him shelter from the storm, doesn't have anybody to give him relief from the troubles that he's dealing with in his life, because he's pushed all these people away over the course of the movie.
I think at the end of the day, when it comes to him, he's got probably, I mean, in real life, Jobs had his wife. He had some kids, like some other kids, but it's like the higher you go, I mean, see, that's the thing for me. It's like it goes back to like what do you value in your life, right? And I don't know. It's like he shut himself off from people so much that like I don't know if he really valued human company. In a sense. It sounds. I don't. I'm not. I don't mean to misjudge him or anything like that. It's just that's what it seems like. That's what seemed like the portrayal of him seems to be. So, but that being said, for the Layla itself, do you know who Daniel Pemberton is? So Daniel Pemberton, I think he's one of the great composers we have right now. It's just in this movie, he really kind of is the one who's at the bottom where it's like he's supporting the movie. Music is always supporting your movie, and he has some really touching pieces in this that I'll add to like my movie score playlist if it's not already there. But yeah, it's not nothing too crazy on this one. And I don't mean that as a discount to him. It's just the movie itself does not give him room to breathe. Literally, like because when it comes to music, it's supporting what you're saying, or
Yeah.
it's kind of playing in between scenes, or you have scenes where it's like nothing is happening. And it is rare in this movie where nothing's happening. There's always something happening. There's always something happening. There's a razor pace to this movie, and it doesn't afford him the creativity.
I just wanted to add, what's really good about it too is that sometimes it's good just to know your place in a movie, and in a movie like this, the score doesn't need to take center stage at all, and it's a good score for what it is. But if you're ever at any point in this movie thinking about the score, then you're not paying attention to what the characters are saying, because the characters are talking 95% of this movie, maybe 99%. So you shouldn't be thinking about the score. You need to be focused on the dialogue. So I think it does well in that right.
I will say Resner, like the Nine Inch Guys, they did pull out some good music on the Social Network, but I don't think it. I think it's because there's more room in there to breathe. I think compared to
There is.
this one.
There's a lot more room. Yeah.
Every time we do this, I'm like, we need Tasha. I know she likes Daniel Pemberton. I hear her talk about this, but I'm like, we have no hot takes about this. We don't have it here. But whatever. Okay. So that being said, who should have been this movie? Come on, let's recast the role in Steve Jobs, Jobby Jobs. There's a lot of jobs in this movie that need to be filled. Zach, give me someone who can be a job in this job. That's a lot of
Um,
jobs.
This is like, I always say that it's a hard one to cast or whatever. This really was a hard one because I really do enjoy the casting specifically on this movie. Part that
Actually,
I've always
hold on 1 second. Really funny fact. I was watching this and the credits, right? Amazing credits, like the opening credits. We see Arthur C. Clarke. He puts you into this movie so perfectly. I don't know if that's in the script. I think it's Boyle with that, but Francine Maisler is the person who cast this movie. And last night I was watching the first Bad Boys, and France casting by Francine Maisler. She's been working that long and she's that good at casting. I'm telling you, she's probably gonna have an Oscar if they're doing casting Oscars. She's gonna have one. She should have had
yeah,
one because this
yeah.
movie is perfectly cast.
Spoiler alert, she's actually gonna come up later, but you'll
Oh,
see
okay.
when. I know. No, you're good. Hey, for anybody listening, me and Vikash don't look at each other's outlines before we do this, so it's really funny because a lot of times we'll have the same thoughts on a movie, but we'll just have those comments kind of in different places of our outline or in our head. So on this movie specifically, I feel like we've had a lot of the same thoughts, and we just have had them in
In
different
different
places on the
places.
outline.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing about this movie every time I watch it is I don't always love the Chris Ann role. And the reason I say the Chris Ann role and not the Katherine Waterson performance is because I think she's doing a fine job. I think that the writing of the role is doesn't particularly lend a lot of empathy to the Chris Ann character. I believe that's the one character who they don't leave a ton of empathy for.
You tell
And
me that men can't write women correctly? When
Well,
has
I'm
that
just
been? Since when has that been a
this
thing?
well, and this has been a real criticism of the
No,
movie that I've
yeah,
seen too.
no,
So I
no, no,
so
no, 100%, 100%.
so recasting her isn't an indictment of her performance. I just think we need someone there who could be able to pull the empathy out of the role. So I was thinking of past actors who've worked with Sorkin before, because Sorkin likes to reuse actors, and we need actors who can do his dialogue. And the character I came up with was Amy Adams. I think she could do that distressed, neglectful mother empathetically than Katherine Waterson currently does it. I think there's a Amy Adams comes with built in a sort of like history with the audience where they know she typically will pay these characters that have an emotional depth to them. And I see
Wait,
you're thinking
I'm
about it.
no, 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 I'm not thinking about that. I'm like, what movie has she been in that Sorkin wrote?
Amy Adams was in Charlie Wilson's War. It was a smaller part,
Bro,
so but
it's been
it's
so
just who
long
I was
since I've
thinking
seen
of.
that movie. I didn't
A
even know
good one.
Sorkin wrote that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense when you think about the dialogue of that movie. It's just maybe not in his like top 5, so people don't talk about it, but it's in his top 10. It's a good movie.
Philip Seymour Hoffman, yet again.
He's awesome in that. Yeah. So that's who I would recast. Who are you thinking of?
I do want to touch on two things beforehand. That obviously this movie is obviously it's perfectly cast movie. Fassbender is perfect for this role. Christian Bale was supposed to be, the guy for Fincher, and DiCaprio was another name that was shopped around for it.
I remember
But he
hearing
but
that.
he did
Yeah.
The Revenant instead. Tom
Oh,
Cruise was
we'll get
thrown
to that.
around too, but Sorkin was talking about it for Build series. It's on YouTube. There are actually great interview series that they used to do in New York. They still do it, but they don't have the same guy asking the questions. And the guy who's asking the questions for this he was fantastic. But Sorkin says like, yeah, some of these other guys that were there, they would have not have played this character because they are too full of themselves in the sense that they don't want to play a flawed character, and they didn't want to play that, or they wouldn't have played it as well as Fassbender did, in his opinion. And I think if it was DiCaprio, I think he could have played it, but I don't know. I think he might have a little too much charisma in some sense to play that role, because
Yeah.
even when he's playing the doof in like Killers of Flower Moon or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you're still like super attracted to that character just because like he has that magnetism to him. But Fassbender, he can turn it off when it comes like in
Oh,
a 12 Years a Slave. He's literally played one of the worst characters of all time, like villain wise, and it's scary. But that being said, my recast, I didn't want to recast any of the kids because it's hard to get kids to give great performances, and I think the two young women that were in this, they did fantastic jobs, or at least all three, including the older Lisa. But my recast for Jobs, like actual Steve Jobs recast, Adam Scott. He
okay.
was in Walter Mitty and Step Brothers, where he's like playing a real like, he's playing a Richard. I'm not gonna say the other word because this is
Yeah.
going on
No,
YouTube,
sure.
but it's like
He
he can play likable, but he can
yeah.
also play the Richard.
Well, yeah, people forgot after Parks and Rec that his like archetype usually was being a real jerk in movies. That was
Yep.
his role, and I could see that, especially in the younger job scenes. Like he could definitely pull off. I wonder if he could pull off the kind of maniacal thing that Jobs has a bit of.
Oh
You know,
yeah, he
being
could.
a
He could.
thinking
You haven't
smarter
seen
than
Walter
everybody.
Mitty, but like
Yeah,
he's that spiteful character. Literally,
yeah,
Ben
he would be good.
Stiller puts a big beard on him to make him even more like more terrible of a
Yeah,
character. It's like you want to hate this guy, and Adam Scott, I think he could have done it. He's an American. He ain't a British guy. And
yeah.
you know what? Every time this happens where they have a British guy playing an American guy, I always go back to that thing from Key and Peele where it's like they're shooting like the wire essentially, and the guy's playing like a gangster, and then Key ends up being like just a British guy. He's like, oh, okay. And he's like doing the whole thing. I always remember that scene. Because that's what happens now, right? It's always British people playing Americans.
Something I didn't put in my recasting, but I was kind of thinking about. It feels like the Jeff Daniels role. If for of course, this movie doesn't work 20 years ago because Jobs is still doing in the
Yeah.
actual present.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it felt like that Jeff Daniels role is just like a young Michael Sheen role. I don't know if you got that vibe. Like I feel like it's the same. Both of them would give the same performance there. If you look at West Wing, even though he's those are two different
Oh,
characters.
you're talking
Mike,
about
what
what's
I
his
say? Did I
is
say
it
Michael Sheen or
Martin
did I?
wait,
Martin
Martin
Sheen.
Sheen.
I'm
I thought you were
sorry.
talking about, Martin
No,
Sheen from, like
no,
Twilight in the like, The Good
no, no,
Omens
no,
or
no.
whatever.
Martin Sheen, who's, of course, like, worked with Sorkin on The West Wing. The
Yeah.
Jeff Daniels performance in here is very I feel like Martin Sheen would have done a similar thing with it in his a
It's
little younger than
because
he is now.
Martin Sheen has this, like, dad vibe very
Yeah,
much to him, especially when he got older. He gives it off in The West Wing. He gives it off a lot in The Departed, same era,
yeah.
right? Where it's like he's someone that you kinda look up to, and when I think his okay, I'm not gonna spoil The Departed again because I did it on never mind. But yes, I understand.
And another thing too, was Robin Williams still alive when they made this movie? Do you know?
I don't think so.
Okay, because it also feels like that's another role where he would have worked really well, Robin Williams, because he
They
gives a
should've
little level of fatherly empathy that kinda comes with his gravitas that would have been in that type of role.
no, but you know how whenever he's doing his comedy at least, you know how fast that Robin Williams speaks, right? So
Yeah,
imagine
that was
Robin Williams
perfect.
doing all this dialogue from Sorkin. He's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go there really fast, and I'm doing it like this, and this is me, this one,"
Yeah.
and Robin Williams would have made it so compelling. Oh my god. We
It's
lost a
sad.
legend. We
I
lost
know,
a
it is.
lesson. We
There's
lost
2 guys, Robin Williams and Philip Seymour Hoffman, that whenever I'm watching a movie and I think of these recasts, if it's any time after they've already passed, we're watching that movie, I'm always like I usually can find a role in the movie where I'm like, if they're alive, they would have been considered for this, and they would have been really good at it. We lost 2 amazing character actors and just human beings,
and they
so it really sucks.
people you could make movies about. That's how good they
Yeah,
were, and it's like they had their flaws too. And I mean, you can see the jobs within them too.
yeah.
But my other recast was for Joanna Hoffman, who is Kate Winslet's character. For her, for this movie, I recast her as Olivia Colman. Do you
Hmm.
remember who she is?
Oh, dude, you don't need to say I know who Olivia Colman is.
Bro,
Yeah.
I don't know. Some people don't know Olivia Colman yet, but they should. I mean, I've been a fan since Hot Fuzz, so a long, long time.
I
She's the
it
only woman
yeah.
that's in the precinct as a cop
I
in
know
the
she's hilarious in that. I love her in, Fleabag. That's where it's probably my favorite performance of her, but I've also seen her in The Father,
the
The Lost
favorite.
Daughter, The Favorite.
She does a lot of dumb
Yeah.
movies.
Yeah, no, she's really good at just showing up in a role and just giving you, like, amazing 20 minutes. So, yeah, I could totally see her pulling that off.
But she has this like almost like the relationship that Jobs and that Joanna have. It's almost like a homey like relationship where it's like they really understand each other and like she's kind of facilitating his madness. And I feel like Olivia Colman has almost this motherly vibe that very much would translate to that role. And I can imagine her giving the fit that Joanna gives. Like, I've been standing here, I haven't said anything for like 20 years, but you need to fix this with Lisa. You need to like she would have pulled it off. She would have given a heart like a gut wrenching performance with that.
Olivia Colman's one of our great chemistry actors, like living. She's someone that you can really put with most other actors, and she just finds a way to bounce off them. The way
Yeah.
that she bounces off of Anthony Hopkins and The Father is just incredible. Because when a great actor's cooking like that, it's really hard to like not get blown off the spot, and yet she's able to stay with them in that movie. So yeah, I think she would have easily been able to deliver the Sorkin dialogue and would have been able to stay with Fassbender the whole time.
The only recent one that I've seen is actually Glenn Powell of all people. Because that man, someone was online, they were like, why does it look like Glenn Powell just gets along with everybody? It's like, no, it's just the man knows how to have chemistry with everybody. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter who he's with, whether it's, Top Gun or the new Hitman or anything like that. The man just has charisma. And Twisters is coming out this summer. Or actually, Twisters is going to be out by the time we put this out. But Daisy Edgar Jones and him are probably going to have amazing chemistry in that movie. But that being said, talking about chemistry, chemistry has apples and apples have boxes. There's no transition to be made here. Soapbox takes. Zach, get up on your soapbox. You got something to say about this movie?
Yeah. So you were hinting at this, and this is the first time I picked this up when I watched the movie because I've seen it a bunch of times. So I've
Nerd.
not seen, yeah.
You
So
like
I've not
Steve
seen,
Jobs? You a
I've
Mac
not.
boy?
Yeah, I'm a Mac boy. Yeah, I don't for all my zero Apple products. Maybe I have some Apple earbuds somewhere, like the wired ones, not the wireless ones. I've not even seen Sorkin say anything to support this, but this time watching the movie, I got the impression that one of the like hidden themes that Sorkin's railing against in this movie is auteur theory. We brought this up during the Inside podcast,
Yeah.
but basically, this is the theory that the filmmaker is the major creative force behind a movie. That instead of a movie being the sum of its parts, it's instead a vision of the director. The idea pops up during the different Jobs and Woz arguments across the 3 acts, where Woz is arguing for the Apple II engineers to be acknowledged during the film, while Job refuses. Woz is arguing for the writers, you know, the cinematographers, every part of the film to be the little guys to be acknowledged, while Jobs, the quote unquote director here, is basically saying that he plays the orchestra. That's what he tells Woz in Act Two. In Act 3, Waz demands that Jobs acknowledges that something good happened when he wasn't in the room for it. Again, a Tor theory, the idea that the director has a hand in everything that happens in the movie, and that's his vision. Waz is trying to get Job to acknowledge that things were done at Apple that he didn't have a hand in that were successful. I want to speculate a little bit, or I guess it's not healthy to speculate, but I feel like Sorkin at some point in his career must have felt like a lack of credit for his work. I don't know if it was Social Network or a previous movie, because he seems to just show frustration through Wozniak that Jobs wasn't perfect, and most of his early success was actually kept afloat by Woz, Andy, and the Apple II team, and the other people at Apple who kept it afloat. So I guess I want to know what you think. Do you think there's any credit to that idea that this was
Rob Reiner.
Sorkin?
It's
Yeah.
Rob Reiner. Because no, I mean it jokingly, but like Rob Reiner, like after they stopped working together, Rob Reiner never made a good movie again. Just saying. I mean, he's made some all right movies here and there, but like he ain't got the sauce anymore. And I
So
love the
is
man.
I mean, and what's telling too is that after Jobs was done, Sorkin went and started making his own movies after that. He started being his own auteur. You know, he didn't want to work with the director again. And I wonder if during this movie he just felt like he got a lack of credit, even though people always talk about him as being like one of the best screenwriters. I wonder if he really still felt a certain way about it. And that's why he went to go make his own movies, and he's showing his frustration as Wozniak here.
Nah, what happened was he was reading about Jobs. He was thinking about Jobs. He's like, I'm Jobs. So he's like, let me go do this.
Well, it might be the other way. Maybe he's arguing for it, and maybe he's arguing that he's the
No.
auteur on these movies. Like, I don't know what side he's arguing there, but I think that argument is being represented in the movie.
I think what writers do is they put a part of themselves into all the characters where it's like, even though they might be a villain or something like that, there's still something about the writer themselves within that character. And like you said, it feels like Sorkin's projecting something into Waz that he feels. And it's like, I am inclined to agree with Waz that it's never just one person. You can have, that's why I always say when it comes to directing, directing is a coaching job. Your talent is the coaching, that you're able to guide all this stuff, this mayhem, into something good. There's some people who like write a movie and know it so well, like no one else knows it but them. And typically that can be a writer director, like someone like a George Miller or Jeff Nichols. But for me, like Jeff Nichols, even he says, like literally, I told you, like he got an award that literally was named the Auteur Award, and he was like, "Yeah, I don't know about that. I am like sure that word exists, but it's me and like 10 other people that always work together that are crafting this, and we've been crafting this for God knows how many years, and that's what you're liking. Is not just me doing this." And he will say it is like, "Oh, Adam Stone, Adam or yeah, Stone, Wingo, costumes, editing, whatever it is." It's like he always works with the same group of people. And Sorkin might feel some way about that, that it's not always one person. And I don't think it should always be one person. It's just one person might show up for the credit. That's about it. And I think Fincher has something to say about that too, because Fincher, when he made Alien 3, like one of the first movies he ever made, he learned a very bad lesson that, like, no matter what anybody says, it's going to be his movie at the end of the day. And he's the one who's going to get either praised for it or vilified for it. Like, he's going to get the hate for it. And the hate he got for that kind of, moved him away from it. He learned his lesson from that day is like, I'm not going to let anybody else tell me what to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. And that's that Steve Jobs energy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. What's your soapbox?
I don't have one, honestly. I
Oh,
don't know, like,
okay.
I my hot takes for this movie, it's about when it comes to character, I see him as being a very human character that people should remember that it doesn't matter, like, yeah, you need money in this life, but it's not everything, and if Steve Jobs with, cultivating one of the biggest companies of all time still had these issues, I mean, he's not the only one. There's a movie called All the Money in the World from Ridley Scott. Real story about how this rich guy, his nephew or somebody gets kidnapped, and he's this old, almost decrepit loner essentially who has a lot of money but won't even shell out the money to like pay the ransom for someone that he literally loves, that's family. And there's something there compelling about that, where it's like the higher up you go, the less human you can become. And that's what I'm saying. That's why I love this movie. It's like there's something sobering about this movie where it's like they definitely could have made a pat on the back movie. This is not a pat on the back movie. This is an actual, look at him where it's like we see all the parts of him, whether it's the great, the good, the ugly, like the good, the bad, and the ugly, since we're talking about movies.
Yeah.
But it's like it's really there, and it's compelling. I understand if it wasn't compelling, but this is saucy. But that being said, let's get into the Oscars because this is actually kind of an Oscar type movie. I will say before we get into the Oscars that this movie is typically the, like, when it comes to a biopic, this is the most baitiest bait of bait movies for Oscar bait. And usually it's like, oh, we're gonna have a person who's gonna become a character, and that character, whether it's like a Renee Zellweger, who, like, how'd you win an Oscar? Like, no offense, Jessica Chastain, how did you win an Oscar? People who have genuine talent. Gary Oldman, how did you win an Oscar? These people are talented, but they have to win Oscars playing people, and those movies aren't as good as this one. I'll tell you that. Did Fassbender get nominated for this, Zach?
Yes. So there was only two nominations for this movie. It was actor in a leading role, Michael Fassbender, and actress in a supporting role, Kate Winslet. None of those were wins. And that's it.
That sounds like they had good campaigning essentially. No, I mean, I don't want to discount them, or like, I'm not throwing shade for campaigning. I'm just saying that like people know their names and like they're likable
Yeah.
people, and
I think
they
they
probably
realized
just
they had.
got nominated from that.
Well, yeah, I think they realized they had to, obviously Fassbender would be a big push and was deserving. And I think for supporting, they had to pick one person to push. And the marketing probably decided, okay, Kate Winslet is a known name. That's going to be the one we have to push. Even though I think her performance is probably my third or fourth favorite in the movie. It's probably not in my top three, actually.
I think,
So, but I think she had the
but
most
that's the
chance of
problem.
winning.
I think she's amazing at this. I've seen her do other great work too, but this is right in line with that work. So, I
I,
mean, I'm not really gonna compare it or like trying to downplay it, but it's definitely not. I mean, the people nominated this year, it was her, it was Rachel McAdams for Spotlight,
yeah.
Rooney Mara for Carol, Jennifer Jason Lee for Hateful Eight, and the winner was Alicia Vikander for The Danish Girl, which is actually Michael Fassbender's wife. If you
Yeah.
didn't know,
That's pretty funny.
they
Um,
weren't. I don't think they
I,
were together at this point, or they might have just gotten together because you haven't seen Light
yeah.
Between the Oceans from Derek Cianfrance. Good movie, but
Well,
I
one thing
mean,
I just
I
wanted
wouldn't
to
say she would have won. I don't give it to her this year.
no, I think we probably give it to either Jennifer Jason Lee or probably that's who I'd give it to for this year for the Hateful Eight.
That or Rooney. I
Um,
don't. Rachel's
yeah,
good
or
in the
Rooney. Yeah.
spotlight. She's good in spotlight, but Rachel's better in, like, are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. But we're
Well,
not gonna. I'm not gonna get. That's actually my soapbox take.
well, what's
Don't
funny
make me
is
get on my soapbox about that.
we definitely are. We definitely did the Golden Pursuit Awards for this year, and I don't remember who we actually gave it to, but we definitely
No,
did do this year.
no, we didn't. We didn't give it to anybody, or we didn't give
We
it to
haven't done
them.
this year.
No, no, we
Yeah,
did
I
this
don't think we
year.
gave it to any of
I'm
them.
pretty sure I gave it to some other movie that's not on this list because we have some other
I do.
juice movies this year.
Yeah, I did wanna highlight too, even though Seth Rogen was not nominated for Best Supporting Actor, he did get nominations at other awards. I don't have those names in front of me, but I remember he did get other nominations, and he was in the short list of the ones that had a chance at actually getting actor in a supporting role. But
But
you want me
like
to
I
tell you
said,
who was in acting and supporting role
you ain't
nominations?
gotta
Because
tell
it is
me.
stacked.
Imma tell
You
you,
already know.
let me
Oh, you can
mansplain
tell
this real
me.
quick,
Okay.
because the problem is that the 2016 Oscars, like, for the 2015 movies, this is the one of the greatest years for supporting actors ever. Because just off the top of my head, okay, Mark Rylance won Bridge of Spies. We have Sylvester Stallone for, Creed. Creed could have been at the Oscars too this year, but that's a whole other thing I'm not even gonna talk about. The Big Short, Christian Bale, Tom Hardy, The Revenant, Idris Elba for The Commandant and
He didn't
Beasts of
get
No
nominated.
Nation. He didn't get nominated. He could have won.
It
He
was a
should
big
have won.
deal. What
Spielberg said he should have won. He's the one who
Yeah.
voted for him. But that was a whole Netflix, like, we don't want Netflix or this or that. And now Netflix is one of the biggest names, whatever. And then we had Benicio del Toro, Sicario, one of the greatest performances of his career, too, right? And
Not
then we
even
have
nominated.
Seth Rogen too. That's 8 people at least from this one year. I'd argue Nux. I'd argue Nicholas Holt from Mad Max Fury Road.
Mhm.
Fantastic performance as a supporting actor. And I you could argue Tom you could argue Tom Hardy saying nothing to that movie for that too, but it's like, let's say there's
Yeah.
9 performances this year. Not nine. I didn't mention Mark Ruffalo because he's good, but I don't think he's great
That's
in the
probably the one
spotlight.
that
But
sticks
it's the
out as not being needed.
but
Yeah.
but I'm just saying, it's like, okay, there's 8 performances this year where it's like they're the top class of, actors coming in small roles who could be, they some of them are leading actors, but it's like they have such fantastic emotional performances. And I could talk about them all. I really could, like Commandant from Idris. Rylance, it's like, oh, it's like, would it even matter? It's like, it's unforgettable, his performance in that movie. Tom Hardy, despicable in The
Yeah.
Revenant. Stallone getting cancer and Creed, and it's like, I'm just gonna give up, bro. He gives up, like Rocky gives up. Like, oh, come
Yeah.
on. There's so many good performances this year, and then
And
you
well,
have
I was
Seth Rogen.
well, I would say on the flip side, actor in a leading role is really weak this year, and Fassbender didn't win.
But bro,
Let
that's
me
the
let me read them
problem.
off. Let me read them off. Okay, actor in a leading role. The nominees were Eddie Redmayne in The Danish Girl. Ugh, not a good movie. Michael Fassbender for Steve Jobs. He did get nominated. Matt Damon for The Martian. Good performance. Is it even a top five Matt Damon performance? I don't know.
If it's like a six,
It's like yeah,
but it's
Brian
really good. It's really good. I
Br-
rewatched The Martian a bit, and it is good. I've warmed up to that movie a lot.
Brian Cranston for Trumbo, and this was I believe this nominee only happened
Breaking
because
Bad,
Breaking Bad just
Breaking
ended,
Bad.
and then the winner was DiCaprio for The Revenant. And I remember the discussion around this Oscars. This was
He,
we talked
he's
about
got to
this
win.
before.
He's got to
Every
win.
now and then, every few years at the Oscar, there's an actor who's nominated in a role who, and it's the It's Time Award, where the performance might have not been good enough, but the thing is, people said it's time because it's a weak year, and we didn't give DiCaprio an Oscar for Wolf of Wall Street. We didn't give it to him for Titanic. We didn't give it to him for, I mean, hell, The Departed.
Once
Like we
upon
didn't
a
give it
time
to
in
him for
Hollywood.
anything. Once upon a well, that was later, but yeah. So we didn't give him, so we got to give it to him for this The Revenant, with because he did a bunch of physical acting, quote unquote. I'm doing air quotes over Michael Fassbender giving a career performance and then disappearing off the face of the earth after that. You know, like
I
it's
still
maddening to me
remember
that Fassbender didn't win this.
I still remember seeing The Revenant in theaters, and at the end of the movie, he's just staring in the camera, and I'm just like, "Oh, he's staring in the camera." He's like, y'all saw this movie, right? Y'all saw this movie, right? Y'all gonna give me the Oscar, right? Y'all gotta give me the Oscar for this one. I went everywhere to make this movie. Y'all gotta give me the Oscar,
Yeah,
please." It sounds like that to me. That's what it felt like, and I was like,
it did,
I
and
was just like,
it's so annoying.
Gonzalez. I was like, I don't know what I like, Alejandro. Like, you make solid movies, you made some good ones, but I'm like, this ain't the sauce. Like, you didn't, you know me, you know my feelings about this year, where it's like, you know, Mad Max Fury Road. That's obviously like my
Yeah,
big movie. But honestly, like this movie, I always say all these years, I'm like, okay, 2015, it's The Big Short, it's Spotlight, it's Mad Max Fury Road, and then I might say like a spot, like a Creed or something like that. But Steve Jobs is like moved up to like spot number two. Like,
yeah.
genuinely, it's Mad Max, Steve Jobs, and Big Short now, which is like, that's a big difference for me, and
I'm
it's
glad you finally
respectable
are
to this
joining
movie.
the club.
I don't
You're
know.
finally
I don't
joining
know.
the
See,
club. This is
but this
yeah,
is why I encourage people to watch movies again, because it's like sometimes you haven't grown up, sometimes you weren't ready for a movie, sometimes the vibe just isn't right, and it happens more than you'd think. and you have to know yourself enough to be able to be like, yeah, I was wrong about that. You can't be Steve Jobs all the time. Like you got to have a little bit of humility.
Reality distortion field. You got to know your field. Yeah.
I know my field a little bit, but it's like I don't know. This is a movie where it's like on the page. If you told me, like a lot of the times when it comes to older movies, I don't look at the Oscars. But this movie, if you told me, I'm like, oh yeah, this movie should have had like everything should have been nominated. And scrolling
Yep.
down, through the Oscar list. Okay, we talk about cinematography. Ah, they should have had a sixth spot because this is another like amazing year for cinematography. Like I think
Oh
Alan
yeah.
Kuchler did a fantastic job with this movie, but he's up against Roger Deakins for Sicario, John Seal for Mad Max Fury Road, The Hateful Eight, Robert Richardson on 70 mil, Carol Ed Lockman, one of the best things he's ever shot, Emmanuel Lubezki, The Revenant. He shot this, he got his third Oscar and then like leapt off the face of the earth when it comes to,
Yeah.
DPing movies. He should have been there. I mean, I think he's up there with this. You know me. This is usually like my category, and I think it is 100% warranted for him to be in this category. If anything, and
Yeah.
I think even the costuming, all that sort of work on like below the line is definitely warranted, and director was warranted too, was it not? I mean, Danny Boyle. I think okay, who's nominated for director?
So director is okay. Tom McCarthy for Spotlight, Lenny Abramson for Room, George Miller for Fury Road, Adam McKay for The Big Short, and the winner was Inarritu for The Revenant. So there's a
Inarritu did
couple
not
there that could
deserve
have
that.
dropped off.
Lenny
No.
Abramson, he made Frank, like the Michael
Yeah.
Fassbender Frank, just
Yeah, I
all
like
6
that. I like
degrees.
that movie.
That's
Yeah.
his movie, actually. That's the one he made before
It's
Room.
funny.
But that being said, I don't think he should be here. I think Tom McCarthy deserved his. I think Tom McCarthy made like the most restrained movie out of all of these, where it's like it's a very hard topic to talk about. He also wrote that
Yeah.
movie, and it's not a gratuitous movie in any way, and that's a hard movie to make. But yeah, Danny Boyle easily should
One
have
more
been
thing
there.
I wanna one more thing I wanna call out before we move on. For the film editing category, we
Oh
didn't even
yeah,
talk about
I
this.
didn't even get to it yet.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
yeah. Okay, so the nominees here, there's one that's gonna stick out, so let me know when you catch it. The
Eh,
nominees: The Big Short, The Revenant,
fantastic. Ugh.
Spotlight, Max Fury Road, which won, thankfully. Oh, Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
That I don't understand how that happened. I that is no
I
discount
don't understand that one.
To Mary Ann and Mary Jo, like Brandon and Marky. They're the ones who edit a lot of J.J. Abrams' work. You've heard me talk about it before that it is always, the best editors are pretty much women, and don't think that there's anything crazy going on with The Force Awakens. I think Star Trek is a better edited movie. Just saying. But no, it's not a hot take. Star Trek 2009 is a fantastic movie.
Yeah, I
And
know.
it's better than The
Uh,
Force Awakens, even though I think there's some good filmmaking in there. But yeah, I
yeah, it's not
easily,
great.
Elliot Graham, he would have had a second nomination at least for this because I'm never gonna get I'm not gonna remove Market Sitzel from winning, but I think the editing on The Big Short and the editing on Elliot Graham for Steve Jobs is some of the best editing I've ever seen. Period.
It
Full stop. And to have
I
three
just
movies in one year that have that level of editing says something where it's like
I just
their editing matters.
Yeah. I just thought about this. I don't know if we ended up doing it, but we also have The Big Short on the calendar to record this year, which means we're gonna have 3 movies from 2015
Bro, we got to skip it
on
at this point. I don't know what to say. We'll see. We'll see
because
what
I
happens.
realized we've done this Oscar segment twice now. We did with Mad Max Fury Road, which we just put out recently, and I was just looking, we have The Big Short coming up later on our calendar. Yeah, we might actually have to kick that till next year because we're gonna have this conversation
The,
again.
the only thing, but I think it'll be a little bit more tame because this one, the last thing we'll touch on, the last two things we'll touch on production design. I think they should have definitely had a nomination here. Guy Dias Hendricks, he's a fantastic production designer. He's worked with Nolan on things like Inception, really knows what he's doing, and I think he should have been nominated because the production design on this movie is actually quite fantastic. It is very low key, but every single place that they shot in or every single little room that they're in, it feels like it's for this movie, and it's fantastic. I think it's an amazing piece of work from him. So Production design definitely should have been there, and obviously best picture. They had Spotlight, The Big Short, Bridge of Spies, Brooklyn, Mad Max Fury Road, The Martian, The Revenant, and Room. That is not even 10 movies this year, man. And I mean, there are some movies that can be edged out here, but
Yeah.
they should have just had it. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, it's a miss,
It,
and, again,
I
the
wonder,
movie made $34 million on a $30 million budget, which means no one
and
saw it. It didn't get any hype, it hasn't been talked about since then. That it makes sense,
I don't know. I'm
unfortunately.
looking and I'm like, I don't know if Sony maybe more like pushed a different movie. I don't know if Bridge of Spies was Sony. I don't think it was, but I don't know what happened. I really don't. Like usually they have money behind these sorts of movies, but they didn't this time around. Maybe they were being spiteful. Who knows? Because we
Yeah,
didn't even talk about it, Zach. Sorkin wasn't nominated for this movie, and he should have been
yeah,
nominated. This is best adapted technically, even though he's the one who kind of wrote the movie himself. Like in terms of the story, it is very much him, but this counts as adapted screenplay. And this obviously the Big Short won this year. They had Brooklyn, Carol, The Martian, and The Room, and the only one I mean Drew Goddard with The Martian, he holds candle, and The Big Short holds candle to this.
yeah,
And I will say, in different year, I would give it to Sorkin, but we do love The Big Short, right?
yeah.
It is
No,
a
we
very,
do.
I think I put them side by side. Today, I will put them side by side, in my opinion, where it's like, how
Yeah.
did they not get nominated? How did Sorkin not get nominated? Yes, I think it is a problem. I think that's what it is. I think it's a budget. I think they didn't campaign for this movie or something. That's what it is.
No, I think that's what happened, and,
They left them
that's
out to
probably a
dry.
Sony decision. Yeah.
They left
Um,
them out to dry with this movie. But I mean, even then, that goes into the legacy for this movie, right? Which what's the problem with it? Like, it's been 9 years since this movie came out, and people don't talk about this movie enough. Was it? I think it very much is a thing of Steve Jobs. The 2013 Steve Jobs kind of killed them. I think.
I
What
think
What
it
do you think?
yeah. No, I think so. I think we've seen this before. It doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes you'll see two competing biographies come out around the same time, and unfortunately, it's usually the second one that gets the short end of the stick. What probably happened is that the Jobs one came out. Anybody who was interested in Jobs right after his death and wanted to see the movie watched it, and then same people didn't want to watch a second Jobs movie, and the people who weren't interested in Jobs to begin with weren't going to watch the second movie anyways. So they lost a lot of the type of people who'd want to watch it. The only people who still watched it were people who might have been fans of like Fassbender or Danny Boyle or real film heads, but it didn't have an audience. And unfortunately, as much as Steve Jobs has meant to the computing industry, there, especially in 2014, there's probably still a lot of people that didn't really care about him, so they didn't care to see this movie, even though this movie is more of a character study than it is about biography. So I
I
think all
think
those went into that.
even then it's like the translation from like being a notable figure outside in the world and then having a movie about you, it doesn't really translate to people going to see a movie in the theater about you, because two things. Number one is that it doesn't translate is, and you have to have, this year, like 2015 Straight Outta Compton came out, right? NWA has fans, Ice Cube has fans, Easy, they all have fans. So it's like that makes sense. Bohemian Rhapsody, they have fans. That movie was $1 billion movie because everybody loves Queen. These movies make sense, but this one, people aren't really, like artistically, like people when it comes to music or film or something like that. Not saying that, it's not like Fableman's made, $300 million or something, but it's like people are more inclined to have artists or people they percept as being artists that have like an emotional effect on them and go
Yeah.
see that movie for them. But I don't know. I no, but see, that's the thing. The second thing is I didn't see this movie in theaters. I'm pretty sure you know that. I didn't see this movie in theaters.
I'm not sure I knew that.
I didn't have the thing that happened with you and your father when y'all
Well,
just went to go see this movie. Me and my dad, we
yeah,
watched a lot of movies, but I didn't see this movie. I
I,
actually have to
I
show this movie to my dad now.
I wrote this on my letterbox, but one of the things that I really love about this movie is that I just went on like a random weeknight, or it could have been a weekend, I don't know, just to see this with my dad because we wanted to see a movie, which I don't do that much anymore with anybody. Like, usually there's a specific movie coming out that I already seen a trailer and I've already seen reviews for, and I'll go watch it. That's how most of my movie going now. But back then it was like, hey, we got nothing to do on this Thursday night. Let's go grab a movie. What's playing? Well, we'll figure it out when we get there. Oh, Steve Jobs is playing. Cool. It's playing around the time we got to the theater, so we don't have to wait. Cool. Let's buy a ticket. And those movies, those times where I've gone and seen a movie like that with somebody, and then it turns out to be a fantastic movie, are really special movie moments to me. Some of my most special movie moments is walking in totally unprepared and then just seeing something that was special. And that's a special movie to me. And part of my legacy for this movie is seeing it with my dad, not knowing about anything about it, coming out, and me and my dad still talking about it from time to time, even though no one else has ever said anything about the movie to us. I don't know another person who's seen this movie.
Nah, it's like me and my dad when we talk about like the Invisible Man, or like we'll talk about Speed or something like that, where it's like, damn, isn't that really, that was a good movie, wasn't it? Right? There's something about the concept, especially Invisible Man, where it's like the concept of the movie is just so potent, where it's like you just had a really good memory watching that together, and it's just unforgettable. And the movie's unforgettable too at that point too, because it's just like that memory kind of locks you in. And for me, I think the legacy of this movie, it very much goes back to that, where it's like the people who saw it and really vibed with it, and some didn't. But this movie didn't get its credit, and it still doesn't get its credit. So it's like, if you're seeing us talk about Jobs, it's because we love this movie. And I think people will find real love for this movie if you go into it like I did. I hate, number one, I hate biopics. Number two, I have no fascination with Steve Jobs and, people like that. And number three, I do actually like Sorkin and I do like Boyle. I like the artists that are in this movie, and they made one of the best things of their career with this. And I hope people go and check this out if they haven't already, or go rewatch it. Be like me, I rewatched it and liked it even more. So you never know.
Yeah, I hope if anything, this podcast shows up on people's feeds and they see it and they think, "Oh, I should go rewatch that, or I should go watch that for the first time." Because if we're talking about it, that means there's something worth seeing.
And
That's
we
more than anything what I hope.
and every time we talk about a movie for this podcast, we have gone through the decision. We have gone through the ringer for this movie, because it's like we have, or I mean, this one, yeah, Zach picked this one, but it's like I would have said something like if it was something I didn't think would, be worthy of our time. This is 100% worth our time. It's worth everybody's time. And
Hmm.
it's not just one, just like a couple hours of recording this. Like, we take a lot of time to do this. And this is one of the best movies of the 2010s, in my opinion, at least. It really is. It's that great. But when it comes to legacy, I guess actor wise, there's some sauce here. Do you know what happened with Fassbender after this?
He went and drove race cars,
He literally
Formula
went
One cars. Yeah,
he went and did Formula One instead of acting. No, I don't mean it in a bad way, but it's
it
just
was a mic drop.
he was just like, he literally acted too hard in this movie, and he was just like, I need a break. And I think he did like Light Between Oceans after this, and then just like dropped off the map for a hot minute.
He's
And
back now, but it was like a good 5, maybe almost 10 years where he was just, maybe not 10. It was like a good 5 to 6 years he was just gone.
I'm gonna rewatch The Social Network. Okay, put it this way: Steve Jobs is so good in retrospect. This movie is so good. Steve Jobs is so good that I am gonna go watch a movie that I don't even want to watch. That is how good Steve Jobs is. I'm gonna go watch The Social Network because this movie was that good. I'm like, oh, maybe I missed something, and wherever the cards land, they'll land. But it's like, that's how compelling this movie really was. And then, I mean, I haven't seen The Killer yet from Fincher, and that's obviously the next big thing that he did after this. Next Goal Wins was like a feel good sort of like very New Zealand movie. I had a good time with it, but I mean, he's got some stuff coming. I'm excited to see what he does, because Michael Fassbender still is one of the best actors we have. He's got a movie coming with Soderbergh, right?
Which one?
It's called Black Bag. There's nothing really crazy information
Okay.
wise, but they're shooting it. And when it comes to Soderbergh, he usually cooks. He was in Haywire, We're not going to talk about the lead of that movie. I do like Haywire, but that lead lady is Kate Winslet. She did Mayor of Easttown. She is as great as she's ever been. She's still an amazing actress. I don't know what else to say. Like, she really, really is so good at what she does. I don't know about her new show, The Regime, but Mayor of Easttown. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's really good work. Jeff
Yeah,
Daniels,
most
same thing.
yeah.
He even went into TV. That's the thing. That's what happens with most character actors. Like, they find more sauce on TV
Yeah.
nowadays. Jeff Daniels was in Godless for Scott Frank. Scott Frank, his Queen's Gambit really blew up. He just did a Moshaw Spade with Clive Owen, another character
Mhm.
actor, where it's like they find more sauce on TV than they do in movies. So I mean, anytime Jeff Daniels is there, it's like you sit up in your seat. It's like, oh wait, it's Jeff Daniels right there. And
Right?
it's like
Yeah.
they put some, and same thing with Stuhlbarg. He does TV, but he's always doing small roles. But it's like anytime I see him, I got to sit up because that's one of the best actors I've ever seen. Even
What did I see him in recently?
John Ortiz, who plays like the journalist, he doesn't get his credit. He's just a character actor. He's a person of color, so he rarely gets his time on screen in any movie in the first place. But I randomly saw him in a show recently, and the only person who really blew up after this, Katherine Waterston, kind of blew up with like Harry Potter, kind of, I guess.
Yeah.
Not that people didn't know her, but Sarah Snook is the one who really blew up because she's playing the other
Oh, yeah,
Andy.
yeah, yeah.
She's playing the
I
other Andy as a joke.
I forgot to bring that up. Yeah, but okay, fun fact, the same casting director for Succession was also the casting director for this movie. So
Oh,
this clearly she's had her eyes on Sarah Snook for a while. So I think it's kind of funny she pops up in kind of a nothing part in this.
you know Sarah Snook's not American, right?
Yeah, she's Australian.
She's
Why
Australian,
is she
and
not in
then
Mad Max, George? George Miller. What are you doing?
actually, she would be fantastic in Mad Max or Furiosa. I mean, the Wasteland, or we're not even going to talk about it. We've seen Furiosa now, and the movie hasn't done well. I love the movie. I really love the movie,
It's a
but
good movie.
I don't know. I don't think they're going to give the man the money. I
No,
really
they're
don't.
not. I don't. I think that's it.
But he
Okay.
got to make Furiosa, so I'm happy. Honestly, I'm happy.
You can tell he okay, I don't wanna get too much into it, but you can tell he really unloaded the gun on that movie. I think he had a feeling that might be the last one.
But talking about directors, Danny Boyle, he kind of low key dropped off the map. You know what happened to him right after this, right? They were like, "Oh, I'm sure Broccoli and whoever they saw this movie really liked it, and they're like, oh, you should do the next Bond movie." And then the whole thing happened with like he was trying to have a different Bond, like
He should have
a
brought
guy.
Fassbender with him.
Like he was trying to have a black Bond, like a younger guy,
Okay.
really good actor, and he had a whole story going on, and he was writing the movie himself. He was getting some authority within it, and then they cut off his legs yet again because that's what
Yeah.
happens when you're doing a Bond movie. And Spectre was, yeah, it was
It
nothing.
wasn't good.
It
It
was a
wasn't
nothing
good.
bag, and that's just what happens. And Danny Boyle, 28 years later in production right now. Aaron Taylor Johnson, Ray Fiennes. There's so many. It's about to be another one. I can't wait for 28 years later, man.
Yeah, me too.
That comes out next year, man. Next
I'm ready.
year. Let's
I'm
go.
ready. We'll have to do 28 days later next year on the pod then.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to pull out the movie that I don't know. He should have just shot it on a camera, man.
I
It's
know, it
just
looks
so
so
hard to watch that movie,
it's
man.
grungy, which is cool, but it looks so bad on a big TV. It really
But
I'm
I
gonna have to
mean,
go find like a
I'm gonna
20
watch it on
inch
my phone the
TV.
way Nolan
Yeah,
intended. I'm gonna
because
watch it on my phone.
it does that part's tough.
But the
Vika
MVP, let's get into
yeah.
MVP because I'm talking about Danny Boyle, but who is the MVP for this movie? You, the MVP, mom. Who is the MVP for Steve Jobs for you, Zach?
So this is probably going to be the first and only time that I nominate this type of person for this role. I would give it to who you mentioned earlier, Francine Maisler, the casting director. Let me tell you some of the movies that she's been the casting director
The
on.
GOAT.
Okay,
She wanted the GOAT.
the The Big Short,
GOAT.
Birdman, Dune,
GOAT.
the TV show Succession,
Jeez.
Little Women, Widows, Blade Runner 2049, Sicario, 12 Years a Slave, Moneyball, and This Is the End. What's something all those freaking movies have? They are
They're
well
well cast.
casted. They
Yeah.
have the right people. I mean, think about Moneyball. Think about the people in that. By the way, another Succession cast member
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that one too. Think about Widows. Think about like the
Yep.
women that she got together for that movie.
Yes, Cynthia
Um,
Erivo is literally playing the witch in Wicked.
yeah,
She can sing, she can act, she's a theater actor.
She's got I mean, I know that directors have a lot of authority over movies, but the casting director is important for making sure that they can actually go get those people. And for some of the other roles, suggesting who would be good for it, because sometimes a director doesn't always know who they want for it.
And it's an
So,
availability thing and all these other things. So it's like, besides being like, oh, like Spike Lee is going to work with Denzel or like something like that, like you don't really know
yeah.
what's going on. Like Michael
Well,
Caine might
especially
come in on a Nolan movie.
yeah, and she's done multiple Sorkin movies too, and only certain actors are good in Sorkin movies and certain aren't. And she has the right idea of who to cast in these roles who can keep up with his type of dialogue. So I think this sort of role that she has as the casting director is often overlooked. And it's nice that the Oscars seem like they're going to make it basically an award for this sort of thing. But she has been one of the
Long
most
time
successful
coming.
casting directors over the last 10, 15 years compared to anyone else, and she should get her flowers for this movie.
Yeah, every time I see a casting director, I always try to look them up. Someone like a Carmen Cuba, like because sometimes when you watch a lot of stuff, you'll see the same names. I'm like, wait, hold up, I've seen that name before. Let me look it up, and then you'll see the entire role of like their entire filmography of like the work that they do, the amount of people they go through. I think with this movie specifically, it's hard to cast like young actors, and the young actresses that play Lisa really hit the mark because it's like
Yeah,
some young actors when they're playing those roles they sound it's almost like Julia Butters when she's in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when she's acting in the show that they're shooting, not the actual acting she does, but like that stuff. It kind of sounds fake. It sounds Philly, like theatery, like updone. But
yeah.
there's a sincere performance there. There's three sincere performances here in Jobs, and you got to commend her for doing that. But for me, MVP, honestly, for me, this one, I didn't really think about it too hard because for me, you know me, I'm gonna say Danny Boyle. Honestly, he's
To
like
your theory. There we go.
but my no, my problem really is I really thought about it. It's like, or actually, because it's him and Sorkin, and I actually scratch that. Scratch that. I'm gonna give it to Sorkin because no, Sorkin deserves his flowers because I think every time, not every time, but like most of the time when he tries to write a movie, I line with him and with Danny Boyle so much to the point where it's like you need an in to the story, and even Danny Boyle is a father of daughters, right? Sorkin is a father of daughters, and that was his in. He's like, I have to emotionally find like there's nothing like I have nothing to do with technology. I don't like yeah, I have made two or three movies that kind of critique it, but that's just happened. But he found his in with father and daughter. I have to find my end within this movie, and it's very much that thing too, where it's like that relationship kind of runs everything else. And yeah, there's more tense things going on, but that's what actually matters at the end of the day. And Sorkin found it in. He writes his dialogue and he's so good at it. And I think people always say, like, oh, like everybody in a Sorkin movie sounds like a Sorkin. I don't think everybody sounds like Sorkin in this movie. What do you think about that?
No, I think, when people say that everybody sounds like a Sorkin movie, I think that's a lazy critique. I think that Sorkin
Yeah.
does write certain characters in a way that are similar in his movies, but not everybody, right, is. I don't think Michael Stuhlbarg's character comes off as a Sorkin typical character. I don't think that the
Joanna.
character of Wozniak doesn't come off as a, yeah, or Joanna. Joanna definitely doesn't. Like, those characters are not giving the dialogue in the most efficient manner all the time, like,
It's
a
Jobs
lot
and
of his
Scully.
characters
No one
do.
else. No one
Yeah.
else comes off.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, he does do that, but even the characters, if they speak similarly in his movies, they don't have the same ideas. They don't have the same pathos, you know? They have different they have different personalities, like, even if they are delivering a language that's similar, like, what they're saying is different.
And that's why I got to give the MVP to Sorkin because he knows what he's doing. Obviously, he's been
Mhm.
doing it for so long. And like I said, I don't want to say shut up and dribble, but please, for the love of God, man, just write more. Please. I
Yeah.
know, and it's not easy for him to write, but when he writes, when he really gets an approach done, he really brings some of the most compelling work I've ever seen. And like, it's aspirational, it's inspirational to me, where it's like, I like to do dialogue like this, to make a story like this with this approach. It is unfathomably genius. And everyone agreed with him. Usually people don't agree with this level of genius. People like Scott Rudin and like the studio, like Sony, they're like, yeah, okay, cool. Like we'll do this if you want to do the biopic for like this big figure like this. They said yes. And it's surprising that they said yes in the first place to me, honestly. But off of MVP, like this movie is just fantastic. And Zach, are there any movies you'd recommend? Any companion movies for Steve Jobs?
Yeah, I'm gonna avoid just saying a Sorkin movie because if you like this movie, go watch any of the other Sorkin movies. Even if they're different directors, there's still a certain vibe to his movies that he's able to
Moneyball
write.
is the highly recommended one from us. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
we
Moneyball
love
would be.
Moneyball. Moneyball is like
Um,
one of the best movies ever made.
my recommendation actually is another movie from this year, and we talked about it a little bit. Big Short. It has that sort of quippy dialogue, but what it does instead of taking the biopic and finding a new way and fresh way to do it, it takes what I would consider a documentary basically, but finds a unique way to tell it with engaging dialogue and performances. So it's twisting another traditional type of movie into a way that's engaging, entertaining, and unique. So if you really like that
And
sort of thing, go watch The Big Short if you haven't.
the guy who wrote The Big Short is the guy who actually wrote the book for the Moneyball. Michael, I'm
Yeah,
forgetting his name. The guy who wrote the book for Blindside.
yeah, I know what you're
Great
talking
author.
about. Yeah,
Yeah, but it's like that. It makes sense, right? Where it's like that. The authority of like what this like he thought of like making this story into a book, and then that kind of happened, and the translation is well done depending on who's doing it. And I mean, Blindside, yeah, we're not going to talk about it.
no.
Okay. But do you have any other companion movies?
No, that's it. It's, if you I mean, Social Network is an obvious one, but it's just not something that, again, I'm low on. Like, I like it, but I don't like it enough to say I would to recommend it as a companion movie. So Big Short would be mine.
I would say two of the recommendations I have, if you like Steve Jobs, first of all, go watch Steve Jobs again. If you haven't seen it in a minute, I think Steve Jobs holds up amazingly well. Second thing is father-daughter relationship movies. I was thinking about Ben Foster and Thomas and Mackenzie and Leave No Trace. That's a good
Mm.
one. I don't know if you've seen that. Deborah Granick, good movie, women directed movie. Definitely check out Without No Trace. And then I was thinking about Interstellar, low key, but you know what, the one I actually, you're gonna hate me for saying this. My
What?
actual recommendation for this one. This is the most talked about Star Wars movie on this podcast thus far. The Last Jedi. No, but seriously, the reason why I want to bring up The Last Jedi is that the portrayal of Luke in that movie, it does not matter to me what anybody says, but it is a humanized, emotional look at a godly figure. Someone, Luke is literally someone that everybody looks up to, right? As a Star Wars fan. And it humanizes him and he gives him flaws. And there's a very human look at that character. And whether people liked it or not, it doesn't matter to me, but it's the same way that I see Jobs because I actually care about Luke. No offense to Steve Jobs, but it's like I don't see the emotion there for me to him, but I see the emotion to Luke. And I found a good relationship to the Last Jedi, and I see a relationship between the portrayals there between those two characters. So check it out. You might like it, you might hate it. I think it's a good
I
movie.
I would be completely surprised if anybody listening to this hasn't seen The Last Jedi, but they haven't.
No.
I think
This
that's
is
a
me
good
telling him to
recommendation.
rewatch it
Yeah.
at this point because
Well, yeah,
haters gonna
true.
hate, but like I,
Well,
I I do love that
you know,
movie.
you almost lost me at first, but once you explained it, that made a lot more sense. So I
Bro,
get what you're
when I
going for.
cook, when I cook. But
Well,
see, that's it takes a good movie to do that. That's all it is. And
yeah.
this is a great movie. Like Jobs is really a great movie.
It's a great movie. I'm glad I picked it for my birthday one because it's one that is not really in the public conscious anymore, and I don't know when we would have talked about it.
Yeah.
And it's a movie I love to talk about, so I'm glad we got an opportunity to do it.
Because we're obviously gonna do Moneyball. That's like a no-brainer. Like
Yeah,
we're gonna
we're just
talk
saving it
about
at
that
this point.
movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the other Sorkin movie. I mean, I don't have any temptation to do the courtroom movie with from Rob Reiner. I forgot the movie's name. Whatever.
Oh, A Few
You
Good
can't
Men.
handle
Yeah,
the truth. I
yeah.
can't handle the truth apparently about this movie, but I
Maybe
do
we need
now.
to do like a Sorkin ranking or some sort of. I can come up with some sort of game around Sorkin movies at some point because we've both seen most of them at this point, I think. So it might be worth discussing in the future about a creative way to go through them. So let's keep that in the back of our mind.
But I mean, Steve Jobs, the definitive Steve Jobs movie is this one right here. I don't want to hear nothing.
I just want to tell you all, this is what Vikash says to me whenever I tell him I'm trying to get the podcast edit. He says, "You didn't have seconds, you had 3 weeks. Universe was created in third of that time." And then I tell him, "Well, someday you have to tell me how you did
Exactly.
it."
I don't see, that's the problem. I don't ask for anything that I don't do myself. I don't know what else to say sometimes. Because I see myself within Jobs, and I see that as being like a cautionary tale to like slow down, chill out. It ain't the end of the world if the computer doesn't say hello. So the computer ain't saying hello today, okay? We're gonna run it on a 512. It's fine. It's fine, y'all. We'll see you next time. Peace and love. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Cinema Pursuit. Cinema Pursuit is produced by Katie Nadell, Zach Nadell, and Vikas Patel. Special thanks to Cole Cooper for the intro and outro music. You can listen to Cinema Pursuit on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you may listen to podcasts. Follow us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram at Cinema Pursuit Podcast, Twitter or X at Cin Pursuit Pod, and check out our subreddit, r/Cinema Pursuit.